Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Regeneration, Culture and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 8th of December 2022. I'm going to hand directly over to our colleague from Services for apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Fern with Councillor Griffin substituting, and from Councillor Andy Stamp with Councillor Osborne substituting, and we also have apologies from Councillor Rupert Turpin.
Thank you. Any other apologies? That's it. Thank you. Record of the meeting. Anybody wishing to bring anything up regarding the record of the last meeting? Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points of clarification, if I may. Page 12. I was a little bit confused by the minutes. The third paragraph up that's under Chatham Docks. No, this one's not confusing, but will we find out if the portfolio holder can confirm she's received the letters referred to and therefore provide a response? I don't know whether that gets taken forward or not. I think she should now have those letters. That's my first point. On the next page, page 13, I was a little bit confused. I wasn't sure if this was a mistake in the minutes. The last sentence of the paragraph at the top of the page says it was considered that due to the complexity, the matter would be determined in the courts, whereas the question was actually about the designation of the land, which has got nothing to do with the courts. Is that what the portfolio holder said, in which case, of course, I think she's confused by the two issues, or is it a mistake in the minutes? She's confused, possibly. Well, I don't know, but I'd like to know if those minutes are correct or not. If there's a view on that, that's my second point. And then also that the paragraph below that's requested the committee be provided with written updates to set out the process for gathering the local plan evidence and the timetable. I don't know if that has been picked up or not. Thank you, Chair, for indulging. I'd like to know if that last point was a mistake in the minutes or if she actually thinks that the designation of the land will end up in the courts.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Vice Chairman, for your questions. Just to confirm, the minutes are accurate in terms of their reflection of the discussion. I'll leave it to members to determine their view on what was actually said. In terms of local plan timelines, there has been some communication has been put out around that, but there will be more formal documentation that will proceed following on from that. We've actually had in the local plan, we've had the local development scheme has set out the broad headlines for that, and we'll be following up subsequently. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I don't think it's too hard to confuse that portfolio holder, as they stated very clearly in full council last year, prior to the draft local plan coming out, that the designation for that area had not been changed. And even though it stated very clearly in the draft local plan, it was being set up for 3,500 houses. So there we go. Anyway, let's move on to urgent matters by reason of special circumstances. Are there any? I would just like to announce to members this evening that we have a slight change to the schedule in that we are going to move and swap item 5 and 6 together. So item 6 now becomes the new item 5 and 5 becomes the new item 6. So we move on to item 4, disposable pecuniary interest, other significant interest and whipping. Is anybody to declare? Councillor Tranter.
I don't think it affects my contribution this evening, but I should mention I'm the Vice Chairman of Kent Fire and Rescue.
Thank you. Any other member? In that case, then, we move directly on to item 6, annual scrutiny of Community Safety Partnership, including an update of the Community Safety Plan 2020 to 2024. I'm sure everybody has read their papers and gone through and scrutinised them very carefully, so I'll go directly to the committee themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's great to be here once again this evening. First of all, can I give a couple of apologies? We haven't got a representative from the Kent and Medway Integrated Care Partnership with us this evening, nor do we have a representative from the Probation Service. As our police representative, we have Superintendent Rob Marsh. We would normally have the Chief Inspector of the Community Safety Unit who would fulfil the role as Vice Chairman of the Community Safety Partnership here. But as that person has only just been appointed, the new one this Monday, that would not have been really fair to them. But Rob has been in Medway earlier, and he did have a couple of years as Vice Chairman of the Community Safety Partnership, and it's great to see him back here this evening. Then further left, we have Sharon Adley, who leads the Medway Task Force, and she's ably assisted by Sergeant Sasha Blumenfeld, who is leading light in the task force as well. To my right, I don't think Ailish Gould-Hayes needs any introduction at all, as she was representing public health this evening, and Leanne McMahon is here on behalf of Kent Fire and Rescue Services. So those, without two absent friends, that makes up the membership of the Community Safety Partnership. So happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Golding. Any questions? Any member?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First question, if I may. I was hoping to see members of the Probation Service here tonight. Can you explain why the Probation Service, who have been here previously, are not here? Because I have a series of questions for them. So that's the first question. The second question is around Kent Police. As you would expect, I welcome Rob back to Medway. I'm sure he is happy to be back as well. I'm looking at these numbers over a 10-year basis, so from 2015 to 16. So we've seen an increase from around 19,000 incidents to about 32,500 incidents. That has effectively stayed the same for the last 3 years. In your view, is Medway a safer or less safe place since 2015-16? And I cite indicators which say that violence is up 12.5%, sexual offences 22.5%, burglary and community up 7.5%, and your own severity scores indicate that we are well above average. So just interested to know what your views are. Are we a safer place or not in terms of that? The second element is around communications. So I've had numerous emails over the last couple of days and weeks from several town centre forums that have expressed significant concerns around cuts to town centre officers. I've had head teachers messaging me about cuts to school teams. Can I ask how much consultation your committee had as a community safety partnership about these reductions in numbers and these changes in officer teams? Because it appears head teachers, businesses, corporate associations were totally unaware that these reductions were going to happen. So I'm just interested to know whether there was a communications failure or whether indeed the Community Safety Partnership was aware that school teams were going to get cut suddenly and that town centre teams were going to get cut. So I just wanted to know what deliberations your organisation had and whether or not we think that the communication has been good. That's my second question in regards to that. My third question is related to response times, which, interestingly enough, are not mentioned in here, but are a significant concern. So the Kent Police has been rated 10 on the lower quartile of response times. This is something which is significant for people. And the telephone services, 111 services, which is really the first point of contact for significant numbers of people, have not been rated adequately as well. And that has caused major concern. Has that been raised as a community safety partnership issue? And what are we going to do about improving that? And just lastly, on the policing matter, just around the PCSO numbers, Obviously, we are going to see a 70% reduction in PCSO numbers. Can we clarify how many PCOs we currently have in the North Kent division in the Medway area? And is Medway going to be ring-fenced in terms of protection from PCSO cuts, or are we indeed going to see the equivalent 70% reduction in numbers? So they're my 4 questions on policing. Thank you.
Well, if I'll start off with the probation service, unfortunately, I don't know why the probation service aren't here. Somebody was due to turn up. I could only assume that there must have been some personal or other circumstances. I cannot explain him anymore. I will leave the crime figure things to the expert to my left, Rob. As far as consultation, I'm sorry to say there wasn't any. For the withdrawal of the schools team, my understanding was that there was 24 hours notice given for that, so there was no opportunity for us to discuss this as a community safety partnership. In any case, the community safety partnership meets on a quarterly basis. It is a strategic body. I would not expect the community safety partnership to be asked or consulted on police manning levels. That is entirely in the purview of the Chief Constable, and as I would fully expect that to be. My understanding, Bob may be able to correct me, that the schools team were brought in to supplement the 101 service to get that improved. So that is as far as I can go, but I'm very happy to hand over to Rob.
Thank you, Councillor, for the questions, and it's good to see you two. We've been working together for a few years now. It's always good to be back to Medway. So I'll try and address each issue in turn, and obviously if I don't answer the question, I know you'll come back to me with a follow-up. So in relation to your first point around the increased levels of recorded crime and my view as to whether Medway is less or more safe now than it was 10 years ago, I fundamentally believe it is a safer place now than it was previously. I think we've spoken before about Kent Police's commitment to crime data integrity, accurate recording of incidents, multiple reporting of crimes from one incident, which has undoubtedly inflated the recorded crime figures, probably to a more accurate level, I would suggest, over the last few years. And it's the one area that we still remain outstanding for at the moment around our crime data integrity recording. And in relation to safety, I mean, there's lots of evidence in the document around the fantastic work that colleagues to my left have led around safety initiatives and work that's been done across our communities in Medway, and certainly some of the work that's been achieved around violence against women and girls I'm particularly proud of, and the reductions we've seen around the really serious end sexual offending in the nighttime economy. And I can give you some fantastic examples of intervention, preventative work that's taken place. So based on that, I do believe Medway is a safer place and a really thriving communities, and so many good things to enjoy about the Medway town. So that would be my response to the first question. In relation, and I think some of the other questions probably overlap a little bit in regards of reference to cuts and resourcing and remodelling, and there is an intrinsic link, as Councillor Goldwyn's articulated, around the response times and the attrition rate around answering 101 calls. So there's no doubt that our control room and ability to answer calls from the public was not in a good way, hence the reason for the force to have to act really swiftly and uplift the resourcing in there it was actually 35 police officers, 26 of which came from the schools teams that working across the county. And it was a very short notice, snap decision made by the senior officers. It was a situation where the resources had to come from somewhere. Obviously, it's not ideal, far from ideal. There was no consultation, far from ideal. There was no communication to head teachers. And I know that's now been addressed by Mr. Ball retrospectively, but acknowledge that, you know, in hindsight, early notice of that withdrawal would have been preferable. And I know that we do regret that, but it was done with the best intentions of meeting our demand in our control room rather than making that decision very lightly. And we fully recognise and thank you for your comments around the work the schools team have done, particularly in Medway. We've had 8 or 9 officers working in many schools, and I think their impact's been incredible. not just around preventative measures, but working with challenging children, linking with the partnership and the wider council. So I think there's been some really excellent results there. And just to reassure you and everybody here this evening, as part of our remodelling, we will see a child-centred policing team element, and that will involve schools having named officers. Obviously, we didn't have a police officer in every school under our current modelling, but our remodel will see a child-centred policing team. We want to maintain and build on that strong relationship we've built with our schools. And I was really proud actually to go and with the violence reduction unit and be there when they signed the knife pledge, and you see the impact the schools officers and colleagues are having on young people. So please be reassured, everybody, that there will be a commitment to working alongside schools. I don't know what it will look like exactly. I couldn't tell you the role requirement or the job description, but I'm sure it won't be too dissimilar from the sort of footprint we've had prior to the team being moved into the control room. In regards to town centres, and I think we've been on a journey there where we didn't have any police officers in the town centres, and we had the PCSOs, and they're phenomenal. You know, the PCSOs that worked across the high streets did an amazing job with obviously limited powers. And then the force made the decision to put town centre teams in, which I think was the right thing to do. And the benefit of those officers working in the high streets, liaising with partners, with the forums, dealing with the antisocial behaviour, the shoplifting crime, the nuisance youth elements that might detract from the communities has been really, really effective. And again, within the new modelling, whilst they probably won't be called town centre officers, there will be a provision because there'll be a named ward officer for every ward across the county. And subject to what officers we get, if I get town centre officers as they are now allocated to me in my community safety unit, I'm going to want to keep them in those areas where they've already built those good relationships and links. But I just can't tell you that's going to happen at the moment. I don't know the answer to that. But certainly we're committed to working with the town centres, and I'm aware there's some correspondence that I'll address outside of this forum around some reassurance messaging that would be probably useful for us to do. The remodel that we have will also see a significant increase in neighbourhood police officers. Some colleagues in the room will remember undoubtedly back in 2012 we had a slightly different neighbourhood policing model with more police officers working in wards, and it was really, really successful. And I think the relationships they built, the trust and confidence that was developed through their being there, we're looking to absolutely reinvigorate that through our remodel. And in terms of your question about numbers, I can't tell you the exact numbers we'll have in Medway, but what I can say with some certainty that we will get the large proportion of what's available because the force recognises some of the challenges we have in Medway, and we need a resource that's commensurate to that level of demand. So I'm afraid I can't give you specific numbers because I genuinely don't know. But what I can also tell you is quite a few of the PCSOs that are leaving, and I'm really conscious that when we talk about cuts, these are people as well. You know, these aren't just numbers and figures, these are individuals with families. We're encouraging them to join the police because we've got a recruitment uplift. By March next year, we'll have 4,145 police officers across Kent, the most we've ever had. And if we can retain that knowledge and that skill set and then embed that into our neighbourhood policing model, that would be a massive way for us to move forward with the new model. And I know for a fact that I've got 2 of my former PCSOs are going to be coming to join the Medway local policing team in January, which is brilliant because they'll bring all that knowledge with them already. So as much of that as I can retain and keep hold of, I will do. I just can't tell you the numbers because I genuinely don't know what that's going to look like in the remodel. That's all going through at the moment. And just to pick up around the call attrition, you're absolutely right, the 101 call handling responses weren't acceptable. A lot of work is now underway with regards to trying to channel shift people towards the live chat function, but we fully accept that's not for everybody. You know, some people will be able to work with that. Some want to speak to some people want to speak to somebody. The impact of the resources that have gone into the control room is significant. I mean, we are looking at members of the public having their incidents resolved much quicker, and I think that's a positive from not in the way we would have liked it, obviously with the resource that we've removed from the schools, but there has been a positive collateral impact of that. decision.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne, do you have any follow-up questions?
Just if I may, so I was going to ask some questions to Kent Probation Service, but I'll write those down and perhaps we can get some answers because they had a pretty damning regulatory report this year. So and it's just disappointing they're not here. Maybe there's a reason there. So just a few things. So in the report it mentions Kent Medway serious crime. There's going to be a publication on some work around serious youth crime. I just wondered if we had a date on when that's likely to be published. Combating drugs partnership, again, there seems to be a needs assessment and strategic action plan. Do we have a date it's going to be published? It seems to be a recurring theme here. And just on specifically around public health, this is a very contemporary issue. At the moment, we have an outbreak in many schools around the country of a particularly pernicious and virulent bacterial infection. And I know in Medway schools, even in my own school, and I won't be divulging which school that is, but we're now entering dramatic increases over very short periods of time. So we're now going from single figures to double figures. Is the public health team responding in regards to this outbreak, and how is it responding to reassure the public, specifically around primary schools, nurseries and secondary schools around this outbreak? Thank you very much.
Ailish, I think there's a lot of health questions there, if you'd be so kind.
I'm not entirely sure it's community safety, but yes, there has been comms gone out to schools around Strep A, signs and symptoms and what to do to get support. And there is close working happening with AXA, the Health Protection Authority, to track numbers and to follow trends. Public health is working very closely with the education department within the council as well, and managing messages and supporting schools when those concerns are coming in and questions are being raised. So very much lines of communication open and information being shared. In terms of the community combating drugs partnership, so the needs assessment is almost finished, and the aim is to have a meeting of the Combating Drugs Partnership in early January to use the needs assessment to agree the initial actions and priorities that need to be addressed. So that will form the initial action plan. What we're very clear about is that we don't want a strategy that sits on a shelf somewhere. Actually, we want this to be a live document. So both the needs assessment and the action plan will continue to be developed and continue to be live documents as trends change, as further information comes in. The Combating Drugs Partnership is a subgroup of the Community Safety Partnership, and there's now a standing agenda item at the Community Safety Partnership where the information can be fed up and that can be shared at a strategic level as well.
Can I just add to that, the Combating Drugs Partnership is a Medway. Some of this stuff goes across Kent and Medway because we work close. Obviously, the police service works across Kent. The Kent Fire and Rescue obviously work across Kent. But the Combating Drugs Partnership is specific Medway based, and I think that's right and proper because Medway has its own unique problems, and those have to be addressed. So that will be very, very much Medway focused, I can assure you that. The Violent Crime Reduction Partnership, that will be work still going on with that. That will be published in due course. These documents will be published, and to follow on from Ailish, the drugs partnership, we've only met twice so far. I think it's, but already I've been very impressed by the wide range of agencies that have joined into the partnership. The contributions that have been made already by the partners have been quite outstanding. So I think we've got a very, very strong tool in the future in the partnership to actually tackle some of these problems. We have got quite a high level of heroin use in Medway. So I think we will work well together.
Thank you for that, Adrian. This committee meets again in January 2023. It will be helpful for all members here, especially on the drugs issue where you're saying you're having a meeting in January. If we have a briefing note, literally to all committee members, just give us an update as to where we are and how it's progressing. Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for you all to coming this evening and for the report. Obviously, Councillor Osborne's picked up a number of issues. I was going to mention the drug thing, and it's good to hear the Chair say that we could have a report back to this committee. It'd be really helpful because that comes into what I'm concerned about. The main thing I want to pick up on in your report is the area around vulnerable communities and vulnerable people, sort of pages 18 to 27 within the report. A number of issues are coming up almost upon us now in terms of the economic situation and the cold winter that we're facing and all the crises that we keep hearing about. Another crisis arrives every week at the moment, as we feel it does. And obviously it's being prepared for that and being ready for it. And I'm reading the sort of summary of the aims that you've got is you know, continue to agencies working together, stuff like that. As things get worse, which they're about to, you know, it's about resourcing and how we manage to do that, and we hear that there's going to be cuts. So I'm concerned that our vulnerable communities are the ones that are going to get hit hardest and hit first. So I'd just be interested to know how that is. But in the context of that, I wanted just to sort of say to Chair and to Councillor Govan, the task force is fantastic, the work that's going on there. I really can't praise them enough for what they're doing within my own ward in Luton, working with the community groups and getting engaged there. And they are actually making a difference week on week now to individuals' lives. So it's really quite remarkable piece of work. Having said that, obviously we are expecting a report on drugs, we're expecting a report on youth crime and stuff like that. And those are all elements of vulnerable communities. And certainly my ward in Luton is one of those communities, but I'm conscious that across Medway, we've got areas of deprivation, areas of vulnerable communities who may not be getting the levels of support they actually need, and that actually we're now getting in Luton, if you like. So I'd like to know how you feel that the successful stuff that you're doing can be rolled out. And that is even in relation to, say, in terms of public health, the green spaces groups, the public health team are now engaging with the volunteers who work on green spaces, which is fantastic because that brings those elements together and stuff like that. So how are we doing, how are we going to manage that going forward? I know it's a complex question, but it is hugely important. I'll stop there for the moment, Chair. Thank you.
What do you want to start then?
Yeah, and thank you. It's really appreciative your comments around the task force. They are phenomenal. I know I'm biased, but they really are. In terms of how the task force operates, working with vulnerable communities, and you'll have seen since their inception, they've worked across a number of different areas of Medway, Gillingham, and as you say, into Luton. I think, and I'm not wanting to speak for Sharon and Sasha, but their ethos is very much not leaving an area till they feel the job is as much done as possible, and making sure that before we move on to another place, we're not leaving too many loose ends that are there and leaving too much vulnerability behind. And of course, then the challenge is, when the task force do move on to another area, how do we make sure that that area we've left doesn't go backwards in terms of vulnerabilities, as you describe. I think our neighbourhood policing model that we will have moving forward will support that, because you'll have more named ward police officers, named ward police officer for every ward across Medway. And I would imagine they'll work incredibly closely with our task force colleagues to make sure that where some significant improvements have been made from a police perspective, that isn't lost when the greater resource leave that area. And of course, tackling vulnerability is very much a team effort through the Community Safety Partnership. Our colleagues from Fire play a pivotal role in that as well as all the other partners. So in terms of the younger communities and the 18 to 27, I'll probably take it back a couple of years, if I may, 16 to 18. We're focused on a wider engagement with that cohort. We had an IPAG meeting last night, and we were really grateful to have 5 students from the college attend, and we've got plans to involve even more young people from different groups across Medway, so we can really hear from the young people direct what they perceive as their vulnerabilities and challenges for them that we can then try and tackle either as the police or through the Community Safety Partnership. I sit on the Child Centre Policing Board, and we get to engage with all sorts of different types of young people through that forum, which is really good, but I just want to broaden that out. So I think our focus is definitely around young people, but but I'd probably go a little bit younger, if it, so we really capture them before they get into that adult bracket. But that's probably my answer.
Well, if I could just follow on that, Rob mentioned the brilliant work done by the Kent Fire and Rescue with their home visits. So I think Leanne would better talk about that than anybody else.
Thank you, Councillor. So as far as Kent Fire Rescue Service are concerned, obviously partners within the Medway Task Force, and we continue to work within the Community Safety Partnership. However, in addition, in our own right, we have other activities, so interventions with youths through our schools education programme. The National Fire Chief Council have recently introduced an early intervention framework which shapes our interventions with youths and young adults. And it targets those that can most benefit from our interaction and shapes that with our partners. We've been recently commended for our referral routes, so when we are using our professional curiosity, when we're both into homes, in schools, through our fire setter programme, our education programmes, our events and our home fire safety work. All of those crews have had a high level of safeguarding training and can spot those early signs of those that need additional support and can signpost those accordingly. If you need any more detail on any of that, I'm happy to answer it.
So another issue that vulnerability, I think is very important, is domestic abuse, and I think Ailish could give us a little bit of briefing on that.
Thank you, Councillor. So we've got a Medway domestic abuse partnership, and one of the challenges we have that is having the voice of victims and survivors feeding into that partnership to inform the work. And so officers both in housing and public health have been going out and meeting with victims and survivors of domestic abuse to understand the problems and the challenges that they face. And one of the things that we've very much heard is the concern around cost of living and the ability to flee a domestic abuse situation, particularly if you are experiencing economic abuse as well, and how you can actually extricate yourself from that situation when there's such pressures around finances. We held a multi-agency conference last week, sharing with frontline staff the support that is available for families, working with DWP, working with housing, working with a range of different partners to understand where you can get that access and access that support. And staff within housing and public health are also currently developing comms and leaflets and information to be able to share with victims and circulate through the one-stop shop and other avenues that will signpost victims and survivors to specific support that is available for them that they may not be aware of. For example, free travel on the trains when they're fleeing a domestic abuse situation that they may not be aware is available for them. So a whole range of resources to be able to support them if they are feeling even more trapped by the current situation.
Finally, on this, because I just mentioned something that's not really emphasised enough in the report. A lot of our young people, vulnerable young people, have mental health issues. Personally, I think the threshold level for the CAMS service is far too high, and a lot of young people fall well short of getting service from CAMS. So what the Community Safety Partnership has done for the past 2 years, this is the second year that we've done it, we funded mental health mentors, and that's been done through our youth service here in Medway. So the youth service work with the young people, and if they feel that they need some help, they engage the professional mentors to help the young people through. This has had some very good reports back, and I think it's probably worth to carry on funding that, because I'm keen that we should not be just funding one-off initiatives, but I think it's important to look at what is an important issue like children's, young people's mental health, and actually put some longer-term funding in place, and that's what we've done. And hopefully, if the partners around me agree for next year, we would probably like to carry on with that service.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. That's very detailed information, really helpful. Just a couple of points then. One is in relation to the Medway Serious Youth Crime Project. Do we have a date for publication of that piece of work? I think there's a report due out. It's now concluded, I understand. And that's a specific question. And the other question then, Chair, is, and I'm guilty of this on often, is that it's great having this on an annual basis. I think it's really helpful for the reports and the conversations. But there's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of initiatives going on, and the effectiveness of them sometimes is quite difficult to pick out. And it would it be possible for, say, a 6-monthly briefing note, 1 page, just to say where these various initiatives have got to, so that when we come back in a year's time to look at them again, we've kind of got a better picture of where things sit. Is that okay to ask that question? I know it's a little bit more work for the teams involved, but it would be quite helpful for us to have that. You know, it's just nothing verbal, just a written briefing note to come back to us to say how things are going. Thank you, Chair.
I think something we can take away and talk about. You're right, there is a lot of work there, Simon, which I'd like to do. And I think as soon as that report's published, of course, I can't see a reason why it shouldn't go to your scrutiny committee here. There's a lot of this stuff could come as a report to scrutiny. I'd be very happy with that. And of course, if a specific officer would need to come to speak for that, I'm quite sure that could be arranged. But it's worth considering.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to jump in there. So if we take the proposal that we would just have a 6-monthly update, just a briefing note issued around to the committee. We do, of course, have performance reporting on a quarterly basis, so there are updates included within that. So I think if that's okay with the Chairman and the Chairman of the Community Safety Partnership, I would propose that we just simply have that briefing note that comes out in the kind of 6 months in between the partnership coming along for its annual scrutiny. Thank you, Chairman.
Just before we move on, some clarification, please. You mentioned earlier on, in terms of domestic abuse, that people may be able to get free transport, specifically on the trains. I'd like clarification for the people who are accessing that service. How do they get to know about it? And how is it publicised to the people who not only do not know about it, but wish to make that escape, but feel very threatened in doing so?
I've literally just closed the document down. So it's promoted through Women's Aid, who's a national charity, and shares the information around it. And as I said, locally, we do a lot to promote information and for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And we are currently producing a new leaflet information specifically around economic pressures, which this information be included in as well. But it is promoted at a national level as well through Women's Aid.
Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 areas I'd like to ask about, if I may. One is around our town centres. I'll say a bit about that, and then a little bit about the police responses in general, and then I want to come back to domestic abuse, a slightly different angle with that. First of all, regarding our town centres, and I realise, of course, that the partnership has to deal with the resourcing it has, and I'm not going to expect an explanation regarding the resourcing, but nevertheless, as has already been mentioned, it does raise anxieties. And I understand in general terms there are going to be fewer PCSOs. I'd like to know specifically what is likely to happen regarding PCSOs in our town centre or town centres, and how they're going to be managed differently if they're going to be more police constables, PCs, to sort of to some extent replace. I don't quite understand how that works, because we've become more used to the importance of the PCSO and their ability to be that sort of friendly voice on the ground dealing with traders and other people and our licensed premises perhaps, and presumably feeding back useful information to the police force. I would really need to get our head around this. And the reason I mention this is, and I've had this theme before, and I've never really had a satisfactory answer, is that while the town centres may or may not be safe, people do not feel safe in them, especially in the evenings. And I really think that we could do so much more, whether it's a communication exercise or however we do it. There are far too many people that are frightened. Now, my ward is Rochester. That's one of the most difficult. But the same applies certainly in Chatham, and it certainly applies in Gillingham as well. But for each of those towns, there are slightly different, it comes across differently. And for one example that was given to me, this is not just the evening economy. I'm also talking about what I'm going to call our street communities. I don't want to get into the debate about homelessness and begging and so on and so forth, but those people who, for various reasons, are on our high streets and I know are a problem for the police on occasions to deal with some of their behaviours. I have had residents say to me, how is it that someone can be shouting and swearing day after day and causing difficulty and be intimidating, and somehow nothing ever gets done? You know, I am deeply concerned about how our residents, how they're feeling safe, and our visitors, for that matter, in our town centres, and what are we going to do? And I'm particularly worried in the context of the changing shape of policing. That's my first area. The second area I found like to mention, as like many here this evening, as an elected representative, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I do not feel the police have been responding to my questions and concerns as I would expect, to the extent I now no longer intend to go to the police surgeries, because on 3 separate occasions I've been promised feedback, and on every occasion there's been no feedback at all. For example, I was asked, coming back to the high streets, when I mentioned about the number of windows that had been broken in Rochester High Street, the inspector knew nothing about it and asked me to provide a list. I spent ages providing a long list of, I think within 6 months I counted 14 incidents. It may have been more, I can't remember, 14, 15, that sort of, it's probably well over 20 because, or 30 by now since I had that. I spent quite some time producing that and talking to all the various retailers to remember when and where. Never had any feedback at all. You know, it just feels like nobody really cares. It was just to fob me off on the evening. On another occasion, I was concerned about the levels of policing, and I was told, well, look, why not you come out with one of our patrol cars one evening and, you know, learn firsthand. I said, that sounds great. Nothing ever happened. So forgotten again there. On another occasion, I have a community, I won't say where this is because I know there's ongoing investigations still. A community in fear, literally somebody going down the street and threatening to shoot them. And if they ever got involved or with this person's business and so on, it's a very complicated situation. And I had about 18 to 20 residents, and I met them one evening, and I asked, could a police officer come and because I'd identified that they were not reporting this to the police. They were too scared to report it, literally too scared. It's that bad. I said, it's no good me as a councillor trying to get people to report things. Can a police officer come to this meeting with these residents confidentially and assure them about how to report things without their names and so on ever, you know, becoming known to perpetrators of crime? I was told the police are too busy to do that. Or chose not to do that. In private, I'll tell you exactly where that was, but I'm certainly not in a public meeting for obvious reasons. And then I am constantly, like many members here, you know, saying to people to use 101 or 999 as appropriate. But the 101 service is nothing less than appalling. People hate it. And I realise that is not something we can manage locally. That's more of a Kent thing. But I just want to put that out there that people find it's, you know, this whole responsiveness to the police is a major issue. I'd appreciate feedback on that. Chair, perhaps if I stop there, because the domestic abuse is slightly disconnected with it, because I realise I've dumped quite a lot on there. This has been building up for me for a very, very long time, and I wanted to start to raise some of these subjects now in a more open public forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Obviously, there's a lot of information there, some of which I'll be able to answer, some of it I won't, because I won't have the detail, obviously, of the specific matters you refer to, but I'll try and work through. So in relation to town centre policing, you know, I think I've already acknowledged the fantastic work the PCSOs have done whilst deployed in our town centres. And I've obviously already spoken about, I can't tell you exactly how many we're going to have in Medway and what their specific roles will be, but they will form part of our neighbourhood policing model. And what I expect as a superintendent in charge of my resources, I'll be able to utilise their skill sets where they're best matched. We will have PCSOs in the new model, it just won't be as many as we have now, and that's the element that's been where the cuts are in relation to PCSOs. But as I've already stated, we will see more police officers undertaking neighbourhood policing duties. We're in this unusual situation of facing budgetary constraints, which necessitates the cuts, but also we've still got the uplift of police officers that we're looking to fulfil. And as I say, we'll have more police officers in Kent by March next year than we've ever had. And I certainly don't intend to withdraw any resources away from the town centres, because I fully recognise the pivotal role that they have to play in Medway, as Medway being a safe place to visit, work in, study and live. Obviously, I'm disappointed to hear of your experiences with my colleagues, and I can certainly speak to you about that outside and try and get you some updates and answers. I can't account for why you haven't had answers to queries. I would encourage you to please keep attending the police surgeries. I think they're really important engagement opportunity for us. If there's something I need to look at in terms of how that communication flow is working back when you're kind enough to provide us with information, then I'll obviously take that away and deal with it. And I'll make no excuse if we've not done what we should have done, then that's not acceptable, and you have my sincere apologies in relation to that. With regards to feeling of safety, I mean, that's a very difficult one for me to answer, because obviously that's based on people's views, their perceptions, things they may have experienced. But I think the work that's been done in the last 12 months in Medway, particularly by colleagues to my left, has really been driven around promoting safety and making Medway a safer place. The nighttime economy, particularly in Rochester, we have officers deployed there every Friday and Saturday night on foot patrol. Their focus is around preventative intervention strategies and approaches, and the methodology we designed in Medway has formed the basis for the Kent Police response to nighttime economy policing around safety of women and girls. So my view would be we've done a lot of work around that, and we've had a lot of extremely positive feedback through the task force engagements that would evidence that people do actually feel safer in the nighttime economy than perhaps they did prior to us having those resources there. You're always welcome to come out with one of my officers. I can make that happen like that, no problem at all. I can't guarantee you it will be busy, but you never know, but you're very welcome. And if you're available tomorrow evening, we have a walk and talk event in Rochester, which is going to be led by Sasha to my left. And the idea of that is that we'll be out with many partners and promoting safety in the nighttime economy, and you're of course very welcome to, anyone is very welcome to attend that event. That's a more formal one, but we do this kind of thing regularly with the PCSOs and the PCs, where they will, in the nighttime economy, approach people that perhaps are in a vulnerable position and try and make sure they're safe and looked after. And I could give you numerous examples of my colleagues making sure that people who find themselves in vulnerable positions get home safely. And as I said earlier, I'm really proud of the work that we've done in the communities. In terms of people being scared to report to the police, obviously I do understand that people don't want their details known. there are simple methods of doing it. Crime Stoppers is a really fantastic anonymous reporting tool that springs to mind. But if I need to do some remeshing around that, particularly in your area, I'm very happy to look at that and do that as well. We're promoting at the moment our community engagement tool, My Community Voice, which is probably something we can do a bit more of, I think, in Rochester in particular, because that's a really good way of us reaching lots of people and giving out key safety messaging, but also receiving message back, information back as well that we can then act upon. So in terms of 101, obviously, as Councillor Osborne's question earlier, we weren't in a good place with that, hence the reason to put extra resources in there. And what I can tell you now is that when I come into work every morning, the number of calls for service on the list are about a third of where they were prior to that uplift of resourcing. So it's probably not perfect, it probably never will be, but I think it's definitely getting better. And there's a definite improvement around our ability to answer the phone. And generally, your point around people feeling the police don't care, obviously I'm sad to hear that, disappointed. It's something that I'd be keen to speak with you about outside and work out how we can address that, because certainly not something I'd want in any of our communities. But please be reassured, Councillor, there's been some incredible work that's been done around safety as well. And I'm really proud of some of the things we've achieved in Medway, particularly in Rochester.
If I could just follow on from that about the perception of safety. I'm going to sing Sharon's praises here, because Sharon has been extraordinarily successful in bidding for Safer Streets funding, which has run into hundreds of thousands of pounds, which have enabled the task force to do some fantastic work. And I wonder, Sharon, if you could just give us a brief outline of some of the stuff that you've been done through the Safer Streets funding.
I'm trying to think where to start. There's quite a lot on my list here. We've had some lighting projects across parts of Chatham, particularly. We've implemented something called the Medway Safe Spaces Scheme, which we've gone to businesses across the whole of Medway. So although my team is focused in particular pockets of Medway, we try to deliver that across the whole of Medway, including some of the smaller areas, smaller high streets like Luton and Twiddle. So that is another way of trying to get businesses involved with providing safe spaces for people if they feel the need to go into a shop. And that could be somebody taken ill, or somebody just feeling that they need to go into somewhere where it's safe and there's a sticker in the window. We've also provided things like Hollyguard vouchers, which are vouchers that can be given to victims of stalking. So that's an enhanced scheme that we've been able to give to particularly women. Active bystander training, which you might have heard about. We've delivered that to businesses, local businesses, people who work in our public spaces. There's a lot of work that's been done, additional work by Ian's team around street scene work, because some people feel it's a little bit unsafe when they see perhaps some graffiti or rubbish and stuff like that. We've been able to do some additional work around that. There's a number of different things. We've provided extra radios for the Shopwatch scheme. This money that we've managed to achieve from the Home Office Safe Streets Fund has been around about £500,000 over Safer Streets 1, 3 and 4. So we're really proud, and I've just given you a snapshot there, and people who work with me know I can go on for quite a long time trying to explain to you all of the things that we've been trying to deliver. And this is to make Medway even safer than it is. This isn't to make Medway safe, it's even safer. And that is what we try and ensure that the public know in all of the things that we're doing. And engagement is a big part of that, because people like to engage with us. And they don't just like to engage with the police within our team, they like to engage wider. We have a fire officer with us, we have people from the job centre, DWP, we have somebody from the council, victim support, and so people are able to actually engage with all of us around the topic of safety.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the comprehensive responses there. Sharon, very aware of much of the work that you've been doing. I think, and thank you, Bob, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm saying these things because I care, and because I really, really want to help and support. I know all councillors do. We want to work closely, and that involves having that communication and responsiveness both ways, so that you know, we can't make you do anything, but we really, the more you can help us answer things, the easier all of us communicate all the time with residents, and the more information we have that can help us to support you, I think the safer people will feel and the more confidence we all have. So thank you for indulging me in that, Chair. Can I go on to my third point, which I think is equally important, but very, very different. Just going back to the domestic abuse topic again. I know it's a very, very complex and difficult area, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I did read fairly recently that 95% of cases don't end up in a prosecution, something of that order nationally. And I think that's more of a reflection of the complexity of it rather than necessarily a failure by anyone. But from a number of cases that I've dealt with in recent times with personal knowledge is, and I'd be interested from the partnership's point of view how we deal with this. It is what I'm loosely calling that early support mechanism. In other words, I think a lot of victims, and I'm thinking here particularly of mental domestic abuse rather than physical. Physical is at least more tangible and obvious, but the mental thing, it builds up and builds up over time. What do we offer? It's usually a female, but not always, but usually a female who is feeling more and more concerned and stressed and worried about a domestic situation, but hasn't necessarily crossed a line into wanting to involve the police in a formal sense. I'm just looking for guidance on where does somebody go who's just worried before it ends up into a very serious domestic abuse, potentially situation later on. In other words, this is in the prevention area of the spectrum. Are we doing enough in that area? Is there more we could or should be doing? It's not a criticism, it's a genuine open question. Thank you.
Well, can I let Ailish answer first? And also, Rob wasn't there, but we had a presentation at the last Community Safety Partnership about the excellent work that Kent Police are doing in remote interviewing the victims of domestic violence by using mobile phones. And that has given a lot of reassurance because there's no police car in the street outside or person in the house. They're able to express their concerns in absolute privacy and in confidence, and that has worked exceptionally well, and that was quite a powerful presentation we had at the Community Safety Partnership. But Ailish first, and then I think Rob.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a really important point because I think you're right. There's an awful lot of victims of domestic abuse who won't come forward to the police for a whole range of reasons, including sometimes not entirely knowing if they are victims of domestic abuse, because it is about control and power, and it can sometimes be a slow burn to get to a point where a victim realizes actually that they're now in a position of real vulnerability that they maybe hadn't realized they were getting towards before. So there is a range of support out there. We have a really successful one-stop shop at the Sunlight Centre that operates on a Tuesday morning, and the strength of that is the range of partners that are available. So, of course, our domestic abuse services are represented there, but we also have housing, we have DWP, we have legal advisors, we have health visitors, we have a whole range of partners who are there, so that all that advice is in one place, because what we knew happened historically is you went to one service and they said, well, we can't help you with that bit, you've got to go over there to get the information around that bit. So we've managed to pull that together in one place. And people can go there in the first instance just to talk about, this is what I'm experiencing. you know, is there something, you know, what, am I going mad? Is this something that I should be concerned about? But the domestic abuse services themselves, Oasis, have also got a helpline, so you can call that helpline and just ask for advice and support as part of that. As well, of course, there's a range of national helplines that are available as well. We have got leaflets and information that gets distributed, and of course through November we had the 16 days of action in the run-up to the White Ribbon campaign, where we ran a series of conferences and training sessions to promote it, not just with the public, because we did have some public-facing campaigns and information as well. In fact, Councillor Golfin came to one down at the Pentagon, and there was a surprising number of people who came forward wanting to talk about or even just take some information. We had a couple of people who just took photos of the QR code, didn't want to talk, didn't want to engage with anyone, but took a photo of the QR code, so they were able to go away and access that in their own space, in their own time, and be able to get the support that they needed. So we had we have significant campaigns that run throughout the year, but particularly in November, running up to the White Ribbon campaign, to be able to support and provide that information. And the other thing that we've done is worked with various organisations across Medway to embed domestic abuse champions within those organisations as well. So it's really difficult to keep that training going, across all the organisations and keeping it refreshed. But if we embed some champions within those organisations who are the go-to people that professionals can go to and say, I'm a bit concerned about this person, but I'm not sure if this is or isn't DA and whether I should take it further, they can have those conversations internally and understand what support is available and where to signpost. So it is a crucial issue and something that we are trying to tackle.
Thank you very much. That's very, very reassuring. I suppose, again, it comes down to communication and making sure as many people are aware of what's available and how to access it. But I did know about the one at Gillingham, and I got to meet one of the lawyers that I think assists there, who's excellent. But thank you.
I think Rob Marsh would like to come in as well.
Just some sort of reassurance around our approach to domestic abuse. Obviously, prevention for us is slightly harder. We often come into these incidents once we're aware of it. And the behaviour you describe around that sort of mental torture, for want of a better phrase, that controlling and coercive behaviour, absolutely, we uncover that quite a lot in our engagement with victims, and it's things like control of finances, control of what people wear, what time they have to be home, that kind of thing. And we investigate that regularly. It doesn't have to be a physical aspect to it. That controlling coercive behaviour is a regular offence that we identify and investigate. And part of our role when we're dealing with victims of domestic abuse is looking at how can you break the cycle, how can you do something to intervene now that we know about it. And the use of domestic violence protection notices and orders are a really powerful tool. In Medway we use them regularly, and you don't have to have a supporting victim for it, so you can almost take that decision out of the hands of the individual and buy them that breathing space for then all of the support services, as Ailish has spoken about, can then intervene and hopefully break that cycle of abuse. And it's something we use regularly rather than send someone out of custody without anything. We'll go to the nth degree to try and get one of these notices and orders in play. So we've then got 28 days to really engage with the victim and try and break that cycle of abuse. And the other thing that we really drive for our investigations is an evidence-led prosecution. So it's quite common in domestic abuse cases that even if the victim will call us, by the time we get there or we start to investigate, they'll withdraw their support for the prosecution. But if we've got good body-worn video footage, if we've got the initial call into the control room recorded, if we've got a witness, we've got an injury and we can evidence that, there's no reason why we can't take a prosecution to the CPS without the consent of the victim. And again, it's something we look at doing under the appropriate circumstances. And I think through the relationships we have here, there's a really close link between the preventative side, as Ailish has spoken about, and the support services, and how we run our investigations. And I think that's a very strong relationship. But yeah, we do a lot of work trying to support once people report, because they're then in the system and we can try and help them as best we can.
Thank you. Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. And I'm grateful to Councillor Tranchurch for opening the door for me. Because I attended my first police surgery of the new type on the 1st of October, and Councillor Galvin was there, and Councillor Osborne, Councillor Van Dijk was there, and myself. And I was extremely disappointed by the attitude of the police officer who was there. Diminishing, pushing back upon a serious event that happened in my ward. Now, you've earlier on said that you felt there was Medway was a relatively safe place. I felt that until the 30th of October. Strood North, nothing really happens. You know, when I get a report from our PCOs, they're very light because, you know, it's not like Rochester High Street and things going on in Rochester High Street of an evening. And by the way, if you want to walk down the end of the High Street tomorrow, you might bump into a few members of the Labour group and colleagues. So what I'm trying to understand is why a serious public disorder was pushed away, diminished, when we asked for police officers to come along to a public meeting. It was decided they wouldn't come. It's pretty poor. So what happened? I got a text on the 30th of October, Sunday night, quite late, from my ward colleague, Zoe Van Dijk. And she described that she'd walked out of her house into an episode of The Walking Dead. There was 150 young people engaged in criminal activity. This is 150, by the way, is probably an estimate which Kent Police put together. It's probably more than that. The incident started at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the evening, and went on to midnight. The way that the police officers was speaking at the surgery, you'd think it was something quite minor. 2 arrests, and there was something happened on a train up in Dartford. It was serious. Now, my colleague, Councillor Van Dijk, is a trained lawyer. In fact, she's a barrister. And the way that was being pushed back, and the way that we were being spoken to as councillors was appalling. And frankly, if that's my first experience of the current type of police surgery, I don't want to go to the next one. I felt diminished, pushed away. So, why was the police so poor in reacting to this public order event? It's not a riot. It looked like a riot, I understand, but it's probably at level 2, probably violent disorder. Oh, it's just a party that's gone wrong. No, it just happened to be that some people had come along via social media to an event that was a party, but the party never happened. If the police officers had come along to the public meeting that we held, which Councillor Osborne, Councillor Van Dijk and myself held, you would have found out a little bit more about what happened. The grandparents of the child who has held the party told us some quite disturbing things. It started at 7 o'clock. They contacted the police at 7. And multiple people started ringing up the police. There's no reaction. It wasn't until a police car turned up and it itself got vandalised. So what were people doing in the street? This is Kitchener Road, by the way, if you don't know where Councillor Van Dijk lives, and the roads off it. We had people with knives, smashing car windows, smashing mirrors, jumping on cars. The person living opposite Councillor Van Dijk had 3 cars, 3 vehicles knocked around. In fact, he couldn't go to work the following day and was lost a day's income. And that was not the only person who lost monetary income. It's because it was decided, oh, it's just something quite minor, that we now find ourselves that people can't make a claim on insurance that something that seriously happened. So 150 people, at least, going on for something like 5 hours. How can I believe any of the stats the police actually produce if they're pushing back on something that I know that happened? And I'm pushing back so much that they don't come along to a public meeting to hear, to ascertain. And on the Monday, my colleague went in door to door and tried to find out what had happened. And she sent on that list following the the police surgery on the Tuesday. And on the Wednesday, she went out and bumped into a police officer who was doing door-to-door inquiries. She said, I've got this list. I mean, we're working on this. It was her list. Nothing had happened until Wednesday, Thursday. Pushed back. Nothing really is happening going on. And the two people who got arrested, one had a fake firearm, and they arrested for that. And the second one was arrested because they came to the aid of their colleague with a fake firearm. That's pretty hard stuff. 150 people, but seemingly nothing happened. Damage done to cars. No, you weren't there, Rob, and you weren't. And you've had some high-level changes at Medway Police. This last, in fact, since the 30th. I know it's not due to what happened on the 30th, but clearly it's the way that things have been happening in Medway that you've got to the point where they've had to look at changing things around seriously, taking out children, police officers from schools, just as an element of what is going on. So why should I believe any statistics that come with a police officer? Why should I believe when you say you feel Medway's a safe place when a serious public order event is dismissed? Members of this council dismissed as if they don't know anything, apart from the fact one is a trained lawyer and barrister. So my colleague has now done a formal complaint. It's going to go through that process. And I hope to see that you or whoever comes to be the superintendent in Medway takes things seriously. Far more seriously than what happened, what I witnessed by the police reaction to what had happened. So that's all I'm going to say. But it's really not for you to answer now. It's just the fact that it's not good enough, and I want to see things changed. And I heard a chance to answer that, I don't think police surgeries are a waste of my time. I just sat there for half an hour and just got crosser and crosser. I got cross the fact, well, no, we're not going to come to a public meeting. If we come to a public meeting, it might have been a hard time for the officer who turned up, but they would have found something out. The worst thing was, what the grandparents said, is that after about an hour and a half, there were about 20 young people invited to this party that never happened. Some of them were going to stay overnight. There's about 20 of them, the oldest being about 16, a boy. And the police said, sorry, all the children must leave the property. And the result is the police officers were pushing children out of the house, getting them to come out of the house, into a fray going on in the street. Why? What were they thinking about? They must have seen that people jumping up and down in cars, including a police car. I don't understand. So it is very disturbing to find that the ward I thought that was safe, the area I thought that was safe, is not safe. If the people are coming from outside and there's such a poor reaction on the night, and then push, it never really happened to the extent you're talking about, Councillor. When people are handing over footage from their the bell footage, the photographic damage to people's day. The police were going around collecting it. They collected a whole lot. I had talked to one neighbour. I talked to people on Friday. They had the couple I was talking to had been witnessed it downstairs, and they're at the bottom of Kitchener Road, and one of their children had been taking a video and passed it over of what was happening, including the arrest. Now, I'm going to go on to that. When I've been talking to people in the area, all the way down Kitchener Road, none of them actually knew the extent of the issue, because they were talking about when it was near my house. Now, if you know Kitchener Road, it's quite a long, straight road. So you get one end of the road is significantly different and quite a long distance away from another point. And they all thought that they'd seen it all. In fact, you talk to them, and they all have a different story, but the things that's the same is the level of violence going on. And when I talked to one neighbour on the Friday, he said, when the police officer, this is the same police officer that Councillor Van Dijk had met, when he came round to my house, he said, we're not going to take any action because they're all underage. We're just going through the process. But invited several times to come along to a public meeting that we held a couple of weeks later. And police could not be bothered to do it. And it puts this community safety partnership in a ridiculous position. Because what is the partnership for if one partner isn't performing to the level I think it should be? I'm quite sure that Calvin Garvin will be taking the Medway Police to task about the way that the poor reaction. It's not a party that went wrong. It's the fact it was a large event going on. Didn't emanate from the party, just emanated from at least 150 people milling around, causing major damage, and you would think that nothing really happened on that Tuesday. Appalling.
Mr. Chairman, can I say that I'm disappointed in Councillor Hubbard. The object of this meeting this evening is to discuss strategic issues. I understand his great disappointment in the service he had, but we're here to discuss the strategic assessment 2022.
Don't hide
and also
behind words, Councillor
the plan. This is not a forum for dealing with individual incidents. If you wish to take that further, I would say that
Councillor
we are here
Galvin,
to talk about strategic
that to
issues.
Trancher? Why did you not say it to your Conservative colleague? Happy to say it to me, but you won't say it to your Conservative colleague. Councillor Galvin, you're a disgrace.
That is your opinion, and you can have a go at me if you like later on this evening, but I do not want this to be a police-bashing session
ladies and
this
gentlemen,
evening.
I think Councillor Hubbard has put forward his case quite clearly of what his concerns are. And I think they need to be resolved, if not necessarily here, but sometime in the future. I would suggest that we move on from this, but I would expect between yourselves and the Community Safety Partnership team and the police to meet up with Councillor Hubbard at the earliest possible time to come to some form of resolution, not just for what's happened, but to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Thank you. We'll now move on
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. I'm actually very pleased about what I've read about the task force and what I've heard along the grapevine. I'd like to go back to a couple of things. According to the HMIC report on Kent Police and the types of crimes that are up, we've got sexual offences up 22.5%. We've got hate crimes up 25, almost 26%. And theft and handling offences are up nearly 16%. Now, I think I heard from Superintendent Marsh that despite the enormous cuts, and they are enormous, that the police force in Kent are suffering, he is hopeful that the realignment of his resource and the reliance on partners will bring us some results. Kent might be seen as a county that's relatively safe. Medway, statistically, I've been told by the police, is safe. My ward is safe. Low-level crime. Lots of it, but low level, so it's not on the KPIs. It's not on the top 3 priorities. Well, I would suggest that hate crime, theft and handling offences, which I think you can pretty much guarantee are going to increase with the economic situation that people are going to find themselves in, are closely linked to the top 3 priorities for Kent Police that were given to Councillor Prenter and I, which were county lines, domestic abuse, and hate crime. I don't know if that's changed, but that's what was given to us. So antisocial behaviour and all the good work that you're doing along the way are kind of the symptoms of worse. Domestic abuse nationally is up 30% since lockdown. I see from the figures here that it's in I'm not quite sure if these are Kent figures. I think they're Kent figures. I have a 1% reduction in the domestic abuse experienced with 442 less offences. I wouldn't suggest that naturally there were less offences, it was just less offences reported. Can I ask, and this is a very genuine, open request, and I was very glad to hear Councillor Galvin say that there has been money distributed for some mental health support. The hidden victim in domestic abuse is actually the children, guys. And if you read the Hidden Children report that Hestia did, you'll find quite a lot of numbers and disturbing things. So I would say do keep the money in there for support. Maybe targeted would be helpful at some of the unintentional victims of domestic abuse. And the controlling behaviour, and you're quite right, Superintendent Marsh, it is something that, with the change in the legislation, it is easier to do. And I am very happy to hear that you are actually taking measures that don't require court action, because I don't know if any of you have been watching and listening around this, but the reason that the majority of cases fail is because the victim has had to wait too long. Court situation is shambolic. So I do sympathise with all of you agencies that are trying to deal with the safeguarding. But what I'd like to go back to, and I suspect Kent Police are the lead on this, is what can we see in Medway that will make my residents feel safer? They don't feel safe at the moment. I've had 3 people this week who said to me, I don't go out because I won't go to Gillingham High Street. I won't go into Chatham. And to be honest with you, I can't afford to go to Hempstead Valley. Now, these are people who are being housebound because they don't feel safe. The statistics might not mean that Medway is a difficult place to live. It might be that it proves that it is safe. But safe is actually, just like bullying is, it's the victims and the person who feels safe or unsafe make that decision. We don't. So I'd just like, maybe, if you can, Superintendent, give me a little bit of a picture of what I might see in the next 6 months to give me some reassurance that despite serious cuts to a £351 million budget, will make my people feel safer. Thank you.
Thank you. So, talking specifically around the neighbourhood policing, as I've already sort of spoken about, there'll be, so in the short term, nothing will change with regards to town centre officers. They'll remain in their posts until the remodel is finalised. We've still got our PSSO colleagues working at the moment in our communities, and subject to the business case that's ongoing. So you'll still see neighbourhood policing officers as they are now in your communities, and then come June, when we have our new model, you'll see obviously that increase that I spoke about earlier, and the named police officer for every ward will be available to hopefully address some of the concerns that people in your communities are raising to you, and then we can work on what the feelings of lack of safety are and what that relates to, and then working closely with the task force and other colleagues in the partnership. If they're environmental factors, then we've had a lot of success around that through the partnership. If they're to do with antisocial behaviour or street groups or whatever that issue might be, we can then try and tackle that. But I strongly believe that the neighboured policing model that we've got, with the uplift of police officers linked to the increase of police officers across the county, will provide that extra reassurance and safety in communities.
Just two questions. Is the funding for the task force in place, like long term? That's probably not for you to answer, or maybe it is. And the second thing is, given that the uplift in police are across the county, and Medway has some specific challenges, are you confident that you will get maybe even disproportionate support from Kent Police for Medway's particular issues? Particularly, I would contend that you probably have a big case on county lines.
Task forces form part of the new neighbourhood model, so that's preserved. And in terms of the resourcing, I think I'm confident that I will get what I need out of the new model in terms of resourcing. The Medway Task Force was set up 2 years ago, which was an additional resource provided to Medway, recognising the additional challenges that were here. So the short answer would be yes and yes.
If I can add to that, I've had a personal reassurance from the Police and Crime Commissioner that Medway will not be any worse off, but will probably be better off under the new model.
Thank you. Any other member? Lauren.
So give it a go. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your contributions. I did just want to briefly comment on Councillor Hubbard's contribution. I do think that his comments are strategic and relevant to this discussion because they're speaking to the adequacy of the police response and also the constraints that are being placed on them by central government. And to be honest, I think these had quite a poor response, as have the residents of Strood who've been affected by the issue that he discussed. And those constraints are, budget cuts by Conservative governments over the last decade. As we've heard tonight, the result of that is that the police only have resources, in my view, to focus on the most serious and violent crime. And we have huge cuts, as we've heard, to the numbers of PCSOs. We're losing 2/3 across Kent. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about, because it's covered a little bit in the paper that we've read ahead of tonight, but also has been discussed tonight, is my concern really that this is going to be a huge weakening of the community policing model that's going to affect my ward in Rochester East and across Medway. My understanding is that we're losing 203 PCSOs across Kent, but we're going to be gaining around 134 neighbourhood police officers. And one of the sort of concerns I have, and I sort of hear this when I speak to the public, is this view of PCSOs as being deficient PCs because they lack certain powers like arrest powers. When actually, they, in many respects, they do a very different job. They are a really valuable community resource. They are that friendly face in the community, particularly to vulnerable people. And they really are really valuable in highlighting lower level issues in communities before they escalate. I've only been a councillor for a year, but earlier today I jotted down a huge list of all of the things that PCSOs have helped me with. Things, I won't name all of them, but things like letting me know about fly tipping hotspots that I wasn't aware of, letting me know where there's social housing flats where there's large numbers of young kids with very little to do and at risk of falling into crime and antisocial behaviour. They've done fraud awareness training for older residents. They've let me know about vulnerable residents who've been struggling with health issues and transfer onto universal credit. And, where we've had streets where cars have been vandalised, at my request, they've gone and done walkabouts. And this is all really valuable community work. And I don't think that anyone would disagree with me on that. But what my concern is about this new model is that, all right, we're getting some more PCs, but because they have these arrest powers, my concern is that they're going to be drawn into that kind of work and we are going to lose that community policing work. My concern is that they will have to cover a much larger geographical area, as will the remaining PCSOs that we'll have, the relatively small number of about 100 or so that we'll have left across Kent, and that we're going to lose that familiar face of somebody walking around our communities that many people trust. So my question is really, you know, I'm afraid I haven't been convinced by what I've heard that we're still going to retain that level of policing and So my question is really, who is going, under this new model that you've talked about, who is really going to be doing that kind of work that I've discussed, that I found really valuable as a local councillor? Who is going to do that under the new model? And do you accept that there is a pretty big risk that some of that might go?
Thank you for your recognition of the work the PCSOs do. They are phenomenal, and I'm really grateful for your comments around the valuable work they do. As a sort of a parallel example, the task force of police officers that work extensively around community engagement, and I would say that the public have no issues in disclosing, talking to, raising issues, concerns with police officers. And the work that the task force have done as police officers, not being abstracted into other demand, into arresting people, being taken off the streets, and Sharon's spoken at length about the successes, demonstrates that we can operate effective neighbourhood and community policing with police officers. I can't comment on the decisions around the cuts in PCSOs, but what I can reassure you on, as I've done this evening, is that we will see a greater resource invested in neighbourhood policing in Kent and in Medway. And I've no reason to doubt that the police officers that will be undertaking those duties will be any less effective than the PCSOs. And a key part of their role, clearly, will be to engage with yourselves as local councillors, address the concerns that you have. And Councillor Hubbard, I'm not ignoring your comments earlier, and I'm happy to speak to you separately. And if you've raised a formal complaint with Kent Police, then absolutely it will be looked into as it should be. And if there are areas we should have done better or differently, that will obviously come out as part of that complaint investigation. But I don't look at the new model as a weakening of our ability to police our communities. I look at it as a strengthening of it. And I look at the task force as a really successful model who have demonstrated the ability as police officers to engage effectively with communities and, as Sharon's articulated, make Medway even safer.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, sorry, you've got.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I mean, I remain sceptical, but I certainly hope that I will be wrong, and that we will see strengthening. I just wanted to come back on one point that you raised earlier, which I think was about some of the PCSOs being encouraged to apply for the PC roles. I think that's really great, but I think the likelihood is it's going to be the younger people who are going to do that, and that we're going to have a lot of really experienced PCSOs, for example, in their 50s, who are going to take redundancy and they're going to go, and we're going to lose a lot of really valuable people with really valuable local knowledge and experience. And just a plea really to make sure that I guess we try and target those people as much as possible and do what we can to make sure that knowledge and that experience isn't lost. Thank you.
Absolutely, completely agree. And the process for PCSOs to join the regular police is looking at a slightly fast-tracked entry route, so we can try and retain them and not have to go through the same level of training, because obviously they've already got some skills and knowledge that would be transferable. And in relation to your point around encouraging people to say absolutely, next week on Wednesday the 14th, myself and Assistant Chief Constable Ball are meeting with all of the Medway PCSOs, and we're going to have exactly that conversation, that those that we can retain, we absolutely want to do that. I mean, obviously there'll be some people that through personal choice will decide they wish to leave or move on to other careers, but we are actively encouraging as many of them to stay as possible.
Thank you for that answer. We have two more councillors who wish to ask questions. They will be the last two. We've been debating this subject now for over an hour and a half. So it's Councillor Lammas, followed by Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I'd just use a pleasing term. I'd like to corroborate some of the stories from my fellow councillors. The first one is on the strategic priorities of communication. I've not read anything in there about one of the priorities being to improve visibility. I know in your communication things, in terms of deliverables, you've mentioned packed meetings and attending annual events and so on. And I appreciate you mentioned that, you know, it's qualitative, people feeling safe, hard to measure, but I just wonder if there's any metric for the amount of community walks that police officers are required to do, how many people they're asked per shift, do you feel safe, can you give me feedback on their shift? Is that a regular part of policing, actually proactively seeking that feedback? Unfortunately, I had a very similar experience that I mentioned this evening with regard to a surgery that I requested. The request was met at short notice, and Councillor Galvin facilitated it extremely well. This was due to an antisocial issue I had in Kingfisher Drive in my ward. I found the police officer, I don't think she was an officer, but I found her extremely combative and dismissive, and she didn't agree to do anything I asked to do. I think the takeaway might be to make sure there's a more senior officer attending these surgeries with councillors. The final takeaway I would just like to say is that obviously all councillors are going up for election next year. So in effect, you're going to have an Medway-wide crime survey of all qualitative data completed by hundreds of volunteers. It would be a really good idea if post-election, you know, when everything's settled, if the police reached out to all newly elected and re-elected councillors and said, can we please have your colloquial policing feedback based on your summer of campaigning? Thank you, Chair.
Is there a question you'd like me to address?
I don't think there is a question there. I think what it is, it needs to be noted and it'll be within the minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any feedback from the community is always welcome, and I think probably my community voice will probably do some separate work around that with yourselves as councillors, because I think that would be that's a really good way of us gathering that information. But I can address that at another time.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the report. Just quickly, most of the stuff I had down has been covered anyway. Trouble reporting crimes, 101, exactly the same experience my residents have had, so we won't go on to that one. Also, you mentioned about the restructure. We're going to have neighbourhood policing again, which I look forward to, nominated PCs. Is there any time frame for this at the moment, if we could on that? And finally, quickly on county lines, the battle of drugs coming into Medway. How do you think the county lines team are doing with that? I know they work extremely hard. Just, you know, some information about lines closed, prosecutions, drugs taken off the street and this sort of thing, just generally. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the time frame for the new model, June is the date we're looking for that to go live. Obviously, the bit at the moment, the specific bit we need to be very mindful of is the PCSO business case and that bit. So we're obviously working really hard to support those individuals and, as I mentioned earlier, encourage them to try and retain them in the organisation. In relation to Council as a Gangs team, absolutely. I think the results they've achieved has been phenomenal. Disruption of lines regularly, drugs taken off the street, people that are involved in violent crime linked to the county lines and gangs team. I couldn't give you statistics or facts and figures, but what I can reassure you that every month we get a presentation, I get a presentation from the county lines and gangs team, senior leadership team, where they're able to evidence to me the work they've achieved and the reductions in harm around the county lines that have come into Medway. And it's incredible, the work they've done, really, really impressive. I think DCI Tallboys from Council as a Gangs team gave a presentation to members, I think, at one stage, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to come back and do that again if that would be of use.
Yeah, thanks for that.
If I could come in there, it's not just about county lines, and this is where the Combating Drugs Partnership comes in. It's also about reducing the demand side, because the police side work very, very hard to reduce the effects of county lines. But the reality is, if our residents here in Medway did not order and buy the drugs on their phones, the county lines wouldn't exist. So we've got to deal with both sides.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to my Vice Chairman shortly to help him out, I don't believe we had too many recommendations. I'm certainly aware we requested a number of briefing notes, which obviously our colleague here from Democratic Services has catalogued, and therefore the recommendation is as stands, with the exception of 2 of those briefing notes, one that we're expecting in January and one we're expecting in 6 months' time. So when we get to that point, I want them included on the work programme, please. Thank you. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I shall do my very best. I'm sure there are lots of smaller items that I think individual councillors will follow up as appropriate. So I'm going to pick up the committee-based issues if I can. First of all, I wanted to move the recommendations on page 56 as highlighted in paragraphs 8.1, 8.2 and 8.3. We also, the committee noted that there will be, we would like to have a reason for the non-attendance of the probation services. I think that would be good to understand. I think that there was a general feeling that we'd like to know why that didn't happen. We'd like to see a briefing note regarding the responses to drugs and county lines, which we're expecting to see in January. Plus a briefing note every 6 months to update on the work of the partnership. It's been suggested that new councillors will be encouraged to feed residents and priorities relating to community safety back to the partnership to feed into their work. Is that it? I think we've covered it.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Clark. Is that agreed? Agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to scrutiny of the portfolio holder. But before we do so, I want to thank the team that's been here this evening, and you've been put through quite a rigorous interview process. I think it would be the politest way of stating it, but thank you very much for your attendance. We're literally going to have a 10-minute break, so I'm sure everybody else here wants a warm drink or put their coats and jumpers on. So it's now 2012 by my clock, so in 10 minutes' time we will reconvene. Thank you. presentation, but also be very brief in his answers this evening as well. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and break the habit of a lifetime and be succinct. I just wanted to show colleagues a little bit of the marketing campaign that is being used to promote MDC's waterfront development. And the reason I wanted to see it, because particularly of interest of this committee with your emphasis on regeneration, the emphasis of the marketing is not on the flats, because a flat is a flat is a flat. But what we're looking at is promoting Chatham as a place to live, as a vibrant new community with enormous history, fantastic location. You know, because we all know that we've got our challenges in Chatham. We've got to actually promote Chatham and indeed the wider Medway to sell ourselves, and this is a little bit of doing that. So thank you, Chairman, and if our colleague there could show the thing, that would be great.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure every member here has had the opportunity to read diligently through the report. And so we'll go straight into questions. Councillor Lammas, then Councillor Hubbard, followed by Councillor Curry, followed by
Thank you for the portfolio holder for attending this evening. It's very kind of you. Just a comment and a question. Comment of praise for the doorstep fraud team, point 15. My evidence on the doorstep is people are so aware of the doorstep fraud team. Everyone's got these bloody stickers. It makes it very hard to canvass, but you know, other than that, that's a great job. So I'd just like to thank whoever's responsible for doing that work. Great. My question to you, Councillor Golding, is concerning how we tackle unauthorised encampments. You'll be aware of the Crime Sentencing and Courts Act that came Act this year, which for the first time in England criminalises the act of trespass. What is your assessment of these new powers, and how do you think they will impact tackling unauthorised encampments in Medway? Thank you.
Well, I think they'll certainly help. We've also got to remember, as a starting point, that whilst travellers can be problematic, they're human beings and have quite a lot of rights. And those rights have got to be respected, and an important part of the starting of the process for dealing with traveller incursions is to do the welfare checks, which an officer does first of all. Then, when that process has been completed, the next step is a Section 75 notice is issued on the travellers. That gives them a certain amount of time, 3 days, I think it is normally, to clear off the site. If they haven't done so, then you have to go back to the Magistrates' Court again. Say the Section 75 notice has to come from the Magistrates' Court. Then the officers have to go back to the Magistrates' Court for a Section 76 notice. Again, that has a specified time on it, usually 2 or 3 days, which after that, if they have not removed themselves from that site, the council is then entitled to call the bailiffs in. Last year, or this year, this last season, was a very difficult one for us. We had 18 incursions here in Medway, but I'm pleased to say only on one occasion did we have to resort to calling the bailiffs in. So I think 1 out of 18 is quite successful. I think because Medway has been so robust and we have improved quite significantly in our speed of applying to the courts and serving the notices, that there's been a bit of pushback and deliberately trying to push us and see whether we keep that work up. And I've got to be very complimentary indeed to our officers that have done that, so much so that officers have gone to the Magistrates' Court on a Saturday, to go and get the necessary orders. So the whole thing has been quite I think the new powers will be useful. We've yet to really decide how we're going to use them at the local level, but one of the aspects of that is also we can now, I believe, charge back some of our costs. And I'd like to thank Tracy Crouch, our MP for Chatham and Aylesford, because she actually moved an amendment on that subject when the bill was going through the House of Commons. So, I think we will have more powers, but what I will emphasise, though, we will use those powers judiciously. We will only do it where it absolutely has to be done. There's been several occasions where groups of travellers have been extremely cooperative, explained why they were here in Medway, have gone to for a funeral or family occasions, and they've actually asked for black plastic bags to so they can put their rubbish in. Some have been extremely cooperative, and we have been the team has been a little bit more lenient and allowed them a couple more days, which I think is a fair thing to do. But what we won't have in Medway is people abusing the system, and unfortunately, one or two of the groups of travellers have been extremely difficult to deal with, and I think it's to the credit of our officers that they've dealt with some of those quite tense situations exceptionally well. Just for information, when I was first given the role of looking after travellers, I asked our political assistant if she could find me what the legislation was on travellers, and it was very interesting. She found a 6-page document, 5.5 pages of which were the duties and obligations on the local authority, and half a page on the obligation on the police. So it is very much a council subject to deal with rather than a policing, but where there is a blatant misuse of a public space, or perhaps put it a better way, where a public facility is then taken away from local residents they cannot enjoy, then the police have taken action in specific cases. So, does that answer your question, Councillor Masson? Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up question? No. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I know that other colleagues have got some follow-ups as well. I'll try not to keep this too long. I appreciate this is probably the last time Councillor Galvin will appear before this committee, so thank you for your time here and your report. First of all, on that video, I think that's the third time I've seen it. I don't know how much it costs, but my son and his friends produce better Minecraft videos than that. So I'm a bit surprised that we've had to go through it again. But there you go, that's life. It'd be interesting to know how much that did actually cost, because that money, as we'll get to, is going to be quite important. I just want to refer to paragraph 22.2.3 in relation to Debenhams. One of the ideas that certainly we've put forward is the building could be used for a new Chatham library and certainly a hub location, and making it much more accessible to the people in the town centre and bring some life back to the high street. So I'd be interested to know what Councillor Galvin's views on that are, and whether or not he thinks that's a workable idea. But certainly that building, repurposing it and using it for the community, certainly on the ground floor, will be extremely important going forwards for the centre of Chatham. I want to also pick up on the issue around, and I think one of my colleagues may pick up this up as well, in relation to Section 106 funding. I won't go into too much detail, but the population, as I understand it, of the centre of Chatham, with all the building that's going on there, is likely to go up by about 2,000 people, and there is no more infrastructure going in to cope with that. So I'm kind of curious as to what the solution that Councillor Galvin has up his sleeve in relation to traffic management and schools and hospital facilities and all the other things that a 2,000 increase in a population in a town centre requires, and how that's going to be paid for. And then I'd like just to come on then to paragraph 22.4.7, which I was very confused by. 22.4.6, apologies. And that is this, where it says net income before borrowing costs for the 2021-22 financial year were totaled to just over £3.5 million, which can be broken down as follows. Half of that sum approximately coming from the Pentagon Centre. So my first question is, how viable is that going forward? Because we know the Pentagon Centre is struggling and there's changes coming there. And then in addition to, if you add up those figures, it comes to about £2 million. So I'm a little bit confused as to what that table is all about and what it's trying to tell us and why it's there. I'd be interested to have Councillor Galvin's answer on that. I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
First of all, the flyover. Well, I'm sorry you've got bored by it, but some of us do still find it interesting. The cost, I believe, was £9,000. We did that in lieu of an architect's model. To do an architect's model of both Garrison Point, the waterfront and Mountbatten House would have cost somewhere around £150,000 to do. Most developments in the past you have seen would have had an architect's model. If you go to Rochester Waterfront, for instance, they've got one. We decided not to do that. We thought that the computer-generated one was a far more cost-effective way of doing that, and I believe that was the case. Debenhams, at the moment we're engaging a marketing exercise to see what the interest is out there for people wanting to take on the building. In the meantime, we've had a number of organisations come forward and expressed an interest in taking space. So we're in a position where we'll be able to evaluate their ideas and then also see what other ideas come up from by the general marketing exercise, which I believe has already started this week, I believe. Am I correct, Mr. E? Was it this week?
It's early next week is when we're planning.
Next week, okay. Yep. Well, it's in. You talk about the 2,000 extra people that were coming to Chatham. I've got to try and kill this urban myth that by producing new developments here in Medway, that it's people flooding in from outside. But the vast majority of the people coming to these developments are Medway residents. They're already using local roads, they're using local schools, they're using the local medical facilities. And I can certainly say that is very much the case for Garrison Point, because I have signed every single sales contract, some 70 odd so far, and on those contracts that has the address of the people who are buying the properties. And I can assure you that the vast majority of those people are Medway residents. Intriguingly, two fascinated me was a couple who are now living in the Eye, which is only 75 yards away from Garrison Point, and there's another couple living in Cross Street, which is probably 200 or 300 yards away. So I think that's a very good example to show how people who are already living in Chatham like living in Chatham and want to buy their first properties in Chatham. So I think that's a very good endorsement. We will be providing extra infrastructure in Chatham. We are going to have a quite substantially sized healthy living centre, which will go onto the first floor of the Pentagon. Negotiations with the NHS are quite far advanced with that. All the design work for that is up to River Stage 3 has now been completed. The design is, I believe the technical term is now locked, that the doctors and those involved cannot make any more changes, so that is now going to go out to tender so the works can proceed. As far as the table there is concerned, we'll start with the Pentagon. Yes, the Pentagon has had difficult trading, has any retail outlet centre, but what I can assure you is that the Pentagon is now trading very well indeed. You'll be hard pushed to find any empty shops on the ground floor, and there's a lot of interest in people taking on new units there. We're talking about, for those figures, for that year 21-22, that was the year of the pandemic, and every single shopping centre in the country had difficulties. But what I can say is the Pentagon is making money, not as much money, I will say, as we perhaps expected, but it is contributing to the budget. And if the profit from the Pentagon Centre would not be going into our budgets, we'd be looking at other places to cut. So that has made a positive contribution for the well-being of Medway Council's finances, more importantly, enabling the council to maintain the service that our residents rightfully expect. The rest of that list is the list of the property portfolio that we have. A lot of those, the debt on those buildings are quite old and historic, and it would be quite difficult to actually put borrowing costs against them. There's some of the investment properties that have been made in the last 4, 5, 6 years, that is easier to determine. We did buy a small amount of property in order to get an income from it. We bought 9 residential properties which were then used to provide temporary accommodation for people needing it in Medway. And I'm talking about decent temporary accommodation, those 9 flats. And there is a paper that will be going to Cabinet very, very shortly that we will be looking again at buying more accommodation to provide temporary accommodation for those residents that unfortunately do need it. We also bought some long-term leases off Peel ports. That enabled the waterfront development to go ahead in some of the Strood developments because there was a very complicated amount of sort of jigsaw puzzle of land ownership. By us buying that out, we were paying Peel a rent for those spaces. We're no longer paying a rent for those spaces. That was quite a good investment. And we also bought a chain of warehouses that are used by a distribution company. That has proved to be a very highly profitable investment. So that was our sum total of dipping our toe into the property commercial area. If you've got any supplementary questions on that, I'd certainly be happy to.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify something here. So, out of all these people moving into Chatham, they're all coming from other parts of Medway to move into central Chatham, and therefore we'll have lots of other empty properties elsewhere. Or am I misunderstanding this whole situation? I'm very confused. There is no affordable element in Trafalgar Centre, for example. You've got no idea what you want to do with Debenhams, and you still haven't answered the question as to why that table doesn't add up. And you haven't mentioned about how we're going to pay for any of the infrastructure that we're putting in. So I've really not got any answers to my question, but I'll stop there, Chair, and leave it for the next person.
I'll come back on that. The vast majority of the tenants, the residents who are moving Garrison Point are local people. Yeah. You can try and spin this any way you like to be anti, but the truth is we are providing homes. And with the First Homes project, the vast majority of the properties that are sold at Garrison Point will be classed as affordable housing because we have a product called Homes First, and those people will be entitled to a 30% discount on the market price of the property. That makes those properties eminently affordable for people on Medway's income. And I think that's very powerful. In addition, the 20 rented affordable for Garrison Point have actually been lived in now for 2 years at White Road. So there has been an ample provision of affordable social housing. The rented affordable units for Chatham Waterfront are under construction at Britton Farm in Gillingham. So I think our record on providing affordable housing is a good one and nothing to be ashamed of. And as I say, I am quite proud of what we've done with Medway Development Company in the regeneration of Chatham. We're getting a new healthy living centre. There will always be difficulties, yes, with traffic, but this idea that people coming in are somehow going to overload all our infrastructure, our facilities, I'm afraid is just an urban myth.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I have on my list Councillor Hubbard, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Tranter and Councillor Osborne, starting with Councillor Hubbard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for showing us the video again. It's nice to see it again. I know Councillor Lauren Hears didn't see it before, so she appreciated it. But I'm a little bit confused because Councillor Osborne is very good at taking notes, and he's just shown me a note. Because when you spoke about the cost of the video, it was £9,000 compared, I think you said tonight it was 150k for an architect's model. But back in the 12th of March, you said it was 90k. So how has the architect's model gone up by 60k?
That would have been 90k for the waterfront, plus another 40 odd for Garrison Point, and then we'd have to have some. We obviously didn't get detailed costings because we decided not to go down that road, but having an architect's model, which is very pretty, I've got to say, is very expensive because it's a very labour intensive and very skilled thing to make to scale architect's model. Whereas with the computer generated images, that was far more cost effective.
It's interesting. How much are the units on Garrison Point going for compared to the value of the architect's model?
Off the top, I haven't got the figures for the individual apartments, but we are talking about 114 apartments, ranging from just under £200,000 for a one-bedroom flat. The first ones we started, the penthouse ones on the top floor are going for over £300,000 each.
Okay. So I'm going to really ask my real questions now. Garrison Point, Section 106 funding. At the planning meeting 2 cycles ago, there was a report penned, by Mr. Harris and Mr. Hicks about your company, Medway Development Company, trying to get out of paying 106 monies, desperately trying to reduce the cost to the MDC. So that report got pulled at the last moment. And you've been substituting quite a few times on planning in recent times. And one of your current themes, you moved on from talking about bungalows, but you're now talking about the costs of people, how the developers can't afford Section 106s. So I'm trying to get to the bottom. Why was the report pulled at the last moment that was going to the committee? We never had an opportunity to discuss why the council was requesting the council to get out of paying its fair share of 106 monies, which is required. If you look at the 106 monies, talk about secondary schools, primary schools, etc., etc. I don't understand the company that you seemingly have part control over are trying to get out of paying their fair way. Sorry, the company, the council is trying to pay its fair way out. Could you explain to me why it was pulled at the last, or could you explain why it was actually presented to the planning committee in the first place, and why then it was also pulled at the last moment?
Councillor Goldwyn, you're not going to answer that because it's an irrelevant question in regards to your report. So, although I've allowed Councillor Hubbard the opportunity to explain his motives before it, it's not part of your report.
All I say is if the Labour group turned up at the training session, then you might have understood it a bit more.
Councillor Goldwyn, I don't want you to say anything like it. Councillor Curry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a point of information. Paragraph 22.44 specifically mentions Garrison Point in the report. So it would seem logical that we can ask questions about that. Would that not be the case?
About Garrison Point, yes, but not about 106 funding.
But isn't that relevant to the development of Garrison Point?
Not to this, it's not. No.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
In that case, then we move on to Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Just one comment and 2 questions, if I may. I just wanted to echo Councillor Curry's comments about really reconsidering the political running of the council's opposition to having a library in the Debenham site. I think our motion on that was voted down at a full council earlier in the year. I hadn't really appreciated quite how cheap the council had managed to get that. Fair play to you on that, though I know there's quite a bit of luck that's involved. You did buy it at the bottom of the market, 1.8 million compared to previous valuations of 18 million. So while I appreciate that you need to have an element of commercial return on that investment, and you will be wanting commercial space, I do really think that bringing a library into that space is a really good idea. And certainly when I've had discussions with voluntary groups. I attended the Medway Voluntary Action AGM recently. They were all really supportive, the Chatham-based ones, and indeed local businesses, particularly hospitality businesses, have been very supportive of that idea in terms of driving footfall and that kind of thing. So would just repeat Councillor Curry's calls for that to be considered as a really significant option for that space. And then my two questions were just in relation to fly tipping and also Rochester Pier. Paragraph 19.3, which I think is on page 41, talks about some really significant fly tipping and the belief that that's linked to organised crime. And I'd be really interested to know how enforcement officers, who I believe fall within your brief, are working with police to tackle that kind of large-scale fly tipping that can come from organised crime groups that are operating in Medway. And then, you know, I'm obviously a Rochester East councillor. I know that Rochester Pier has been down for quite a long time. I think it was damaged earlier in this year. So I appreciate the sort of short paragraph talking about how it's going to be mended. But just wondering if you can provide some more details on when that will actually be able to take place. Thank you.
Right, first of all, go back to the Devons thing. We have a perfectly serviceable, good quality library and hub already in Chatham. It was considered, you know, why try and reinvent it. It's there, it's well used, it's well positioned, it's got excellent connectivity, it's in a fascinating old building. It was discussed whether that was an option, but that option was pretty quickly dismissed. And I believe there are plans to further enhance the facilities of the Chatham hub in future times. Yes, fly tipping is an enormous problem, particularly with some of the stuff that's been fly tipped recently, where some of the waste was very, very heavy. It was building materials. It was very large tonnages, which cost a lot of money to clear up and disposed of. I personally think that the fines that the courts are able to give for these are not sufficient. It's not a deterrent, because the cost of proper disposal, with the tax on it, landfill tax, makes it very, very worthwhile for these people. So I think there's not an adequate deterrent for them. Having said that, though, I think that our officers have worked very, very well. They've worked with the police to make where they possibly can, and there have been some successful prosecutions, one quite recently where a builder was found to be tipping waste building materials. So that work will continue. Every single case, the waste is inspected to find whether there is any material in there that could trace it back to its origin. I can't really add much more. I think the teams are working extraordinarily hard and well, and I think we all need to have a vote of thanks for them, because they do a very good job. Rochester Pier is quite a difficult one to tackle. It needs an extensive amount of work doing on it. We are looking at the possible ways of going forward, whether it would be better to put it into a trust. There's certain local organisations that would be prepared to donate quite considerable sums of money that could help with that sort of project, but they would not do it all the time that the pier was directly in the ownership of the council, because they are only allowed to go through non-council organisations. So we're looking at all the possibilities. Initially, we've got to make sure that the bits of the pontoon that are being put up at a funny angle because of the weight of the link span that's on top of them. That's all removed, so we don't want the danger of any floating off down the river. There's also 2 rather large wooden dolphins that go back to the original Victorian structure that need removing as well. That they have not been in use for some considerable time. They were designed that when paddle steamers went up and to take passengers on, they sort of acted as a platform for the horizontal platform, a vertical and horizontal platform for the ship to go alongside. There's a considerable amount of work being done on that. We're talking to various agencies to see which is the most cost-effective repair. We have got £130,000 that we can spend on the refurbishment, not the initial getting the thing tidied up, but that's come from Countryside because they want the original planning permission for Rochester Riverside had a bridge over the creek. Countryside decided they didn't really want to do that, and it went to the planning committee. Planning committee members will recall that 106 obligation was taken away, and in return they offered £130,000 towards the restoration of Rochester Pier. So we will certainly be able to use that. The works are quite extensive because the link span is in a very, very poor state of repair, plus the Victorian T-section needs a considerable amount of work doing on as well. There's been some botched up repairs done in the past by putting concrete underneath. That needs removing and sorting out. So it's quite an interesting project, and you know, it is moving, but albeit slowly. You know, indeed, I've got to say, Councillor, I'd like it to be moving much faster, but it is quite an issue, and because also, whilst we own the pier, we don't actually own the riverbank or the riverbed that it sits on. That's still under the auspices of Peel Ports. So there's quite complicated negotiations as to what we do. We've got to, you know, get them on board as well. Does that answer your questions? Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. Fish and chip shop shuts at 10, so I'm going to be very quick. I mean, page 40, the rapid deployment cameras, which I'm very interested in, can they be used for some of the fly tipping hotspots where lorries turn up with huge amounts and quite regularly? If not, why not? Can you just respond to that? That's my only question. Thank you.
No, that's not possible. The rapid deployment cameras are specifically used for crime hotspots, usually to, first of all, establish for a period of time whether the level of antisocial or criminal behaviour in a certain area warrants having a permanent camera. I believe we've deployed some 9 times in the last 12 months a rapid deployment camera. If the level of activity that camera detects would then warrant a permanent camera, then it goes back to the Community Safety Partnership to ask whether a permanent camera could be put up. That has been the case in a number of places. I believe Barnfield in Councillor Osborne's ward is a good example of that. We've had the rapid deployment cameras up there. The considerable antisocial and other activities, fire setting and other things that were going on there proved the point that the permanent cameras is warranted. So.
Okay, I'm not going to prolong it. I'm disappointed. I'm not sure that I accept that personally, but I'll pick it up later. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you very much. I think flight tipping is considered a crime, I think, for most people, but I'm sure Councillor Tranter will pick that up. Just on a couple of things. So first of all, on the costing for the architect's models, I understand you came up with a figure of 90k earlier on this year, and you've clarified now it's 150k was the alternative. That's almost half the price of a house. So for many cases, sometimes the price of a house. Are you saying the architect's models, might I suggest you go to perhaps a different company to get a pricing for architect's models? I appreciate they are expensive, but 150k does sound slightly excessive.
That's the. I mean, if you don't believe me, go into Chatham Historic Dockyard. There's a company that make the models. And ask them.
All I'll say is I'm glad you said no, and I'm glad the taxpayers are too. So I'm just moving on, if I may. So just on 22.5.2, so my first question is a very short answer. What proportion of the top floor of the Pentagon Centre is occupied? The second question is on 23.6. Now, this was resolved at Council, so I'm just wondering if I'm slightly worried that it may not have been resolved at Council. It says within it, the financial position and procurement approach are now under review for the Splashes leisure pool. I'm assuming that isn't actually the case, and that the costing that was provided to members at the full Council was indeed the final costing. Certainly Councillor Doe made that very clear. And just regards to 23.26 MDC, and I'm going to be careful because I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your comment earlier. So SIPFA best practice, and even in the auditor's report, and I have asked this previously, it has said that members of an executive body, so cabinet members, should not sit on LATCOs or third-party organisations. My colleague here has raised, and though it hasn't been taken, about a situation that, in context to a planning application. Do you not believe now that we should be following SIPFA best practice and even our own auditor's recommendations that maybe executive members of cabinet should not be sitting on LATCOs, including companies like MDC, and that actually now is the time for us to have an independent third-party approach because of perceived conflicts of interest that have been alluded to earlier? They're my questions. Thank you.
First of all, you asked about the occupancy rate for the first floor of the Pentagon. That is virtually decanted in order that the Healthy Living Centre progresses. There's some minor charities and businesses still to move. The biggest one that will move from the first floor is Wilko's. Wilko's approached us actually before the Healthy Living Centre came on the horizon to ask if they could occupy units downstairs and extend sideways. So the plans are that they take over the 2 units between their existing units and the Sainsbury's store. But by the beginning of next year, the vast majority of the first floor will be empty, and the works for the Healthy Living Centre will commence. As far as Splashes and its costings are concerned, my understanding is yet we have not gone out for a tender, but that figure that went to full council allowed a safety margin that would not necessitate coming back to council to ask for a further capital provision. The hope is, and our intention is, that the costings should be below that figure. When it comes to board membership, I have no problem as a portfolio holder sitting on the board of MDC. In public companies, it is the normal practice for a major shareholder to be represented on the board of a company. In non-quoted or private companies, it's the custom that the majority of the shareholders would be on the board of the company. Whether SIPFA likes that particular model, I couldn't comment. That's up to them. All I will say is that by myself and Councillor Doe sitting on the board of MDC, that enables the company to be operated in the best interest of the shareholder, which is this council, and through this council, the people of Medway. MDC has delivered regeneration projects that the private sector were unable to deliver. There was extensive marketing of the waterfront area. Nobody in the private sector was interested to taking that on. MDC took it on because we could accept much lower profit margins than a normal developer would accept. The council has already made money out of both Garrison Point and the waterfront because they've had a capital receipt for the sale of the land. They're also, the council is also receiving several £100,000 a year in interest charges. So as a shareholder, the council is doing very well out of it. I will always continue, as will Councillor Doe, to make sure that MDC promotes the aims and objectives of regeneration and enhancement of Chatham or any other areas that it is designated to develop in, to make sure that we have town centres and developments that we can be proud of, that we provide good quality housing for our residents. We have provided good quality rented affordable accommodation that is now operated by MDC at Medway, MHS, sorry. So I think the track record of delivery is pretty good. When I sat in front of you a year ago, I was able to say that we'd sold the first property at Garrison Point. Here we are, 12 months on. We have now sold 70.43% of the properties. Normally a private sector, private developer would expect to have 50% of its properties sold off plan before the residents move in. By the time our residents move in January next year, we will probably have 80% sold. That is a phenomenal record for a new company to produce, and I think it's something that we can all be very proud of. At the moment, we have sold 72 properties at Garrison Point, and we have sold our first two on the waterfront.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, so I'm very, very pleased that you've sold 72% of the properties. Perhaps 106 monies could be received by us, because again, it was the conflict of interest, the perception of a conflict of interest, and SIP for guidance is really is clear on best practice. But I will leave that for another time. And I just wanted to raise this last, because we're all sitting here shivering, freezing cold. You're responsible for property. Is this not a metaphor for the current situation? We are all freezing in here. This building is not heated. It's not really appropriate for us to be sat in here. I think probably health and safety. There's members of staff at the end here. Are you going to apologise to us for us having to sit in freezing cold conditions like we are tonight, wearing coats and scarves? Why is this room not warm enough for people to work in?
Yes, I am sorry it's cold, and I wish personally it was warm, but I'm pleased to say that we are looking at proposals to make sure that we don't have to do this in future. We're looking at rearranging the committee rooms in Gun Wharf to make sure that we have got a committee room that is large enough to take the full council and all other meetings, as well as a public gallery. This is a beautiful old building, but I don't think it's fit for purpose for what we're trying to use it for tonight. The acoustics are appalling, it's cold, it's a big barn. Yes, it's a lovely building, but it's not suitable for what we're trying to use it for tonight. It's a historic fact that we acquired this building. I'm not quite sure why, but we did all those years ago. But certainly we've had some interesting offers from local universities who want to use the building more. So Yes, I'm sorry you're cold. I'm cold. I would like it not to be the case, but we are dealing with an antiquated Edwardian building that is no longer fit for purpose for the use that we're trying to use it for. And as I say, we will be discussing indeed tomorrow morning the possible alternatives that we could have for this.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. Out of the 75% that you have sold at Garrison Point, how many of them are you selling at 65% of the market value under the scheme? That's one of the questions. I'm a bit confused about the HRA programme that appears in this report. Just maybe a bit of clarification around that. You say you continue to support the housing works. This year, the defects of roofing nearly complete. I'm just wondering where they are. And I think I'll leave it at that because the conflict of interest on one board, it must be really difficult to do that. And that's why I think that there is good guidance for people who might have a potential to be thinking as a councillor when they're supposed to be thinking as a board member. That's all.
Right, it's a 70% of Costco. It's 30% discount for the new homes project.
I thought you said 33% earlier.
No,
Sorry. I beg your pardon.
It's a 30%.
I misheard you.
Yes, 30%. And I think we have about £10 million worth of funding for each for Garrison Point and for the waterfront from Homes England. At the moment, it looks like we're going to get an increase on that. So but that's not absolutely set in stone yet. What that refers to with the HRA and schools is the work of the capital projects team that sits in my portfolio. They do a lot of work on school extensions, replacement heating systems, advising the HRA on those sort of issues as well. So that team are the ones who I will probably be going back to tomorrow to say what we're going to do about the heating in this particular building now. But the capital projects team are a good example of some of the back office staff that we've got that do a tremendous amount of cost-effective work. The new Abbey Court School was one of their projects, the extension to the crematorium and the new mercury abatement equipment that went into the crematorium, that was all overseen by the capital projects team. So that's what that's referring to.
Thank you. It's just that the note in 2313 confused me. It's not clear. So if we're sending these reports to us in the future, can we have a little bit of clarity? Thanks.
Thank you. Any other member? In that case, I've got a question for you and a couple of comments. On page 26, we're talking about community payback on 3.1, saying that it's now been reinstated. I have some concerns in there where you say in the very last sentence to explore what ways which the project can be developed further in Chatham and Luton. Does that then exclude the rest of Medway for community payback? Also understand that we still do not have a full contact point for booking a community payback that's been passed to councillors. And more importantly, I understand that there is an issue in terms of both transport of the people on community payback and, of course, what projects they're allowed to undertake. So I'll have answers to those, please. And then, as I said, I've got two comments to make.
Well, if you, Chair, with due respect, if you look at the beginning of that sentence where it mentions Chatham, it's talking about the Medway task force, and the Medway task force at the moment is primarily focused in that particular...
I've read the sentence, I'll read it all out in total, shall I? A recent meeting has taken place between Community Payback, Medway Task Force and the Community Safety Team to explore ways which the project can be developed further in Chatham and Luton. We're already aware of Medway Task Force and the Community Safety Team. We're talking about the reinstatement of Community Payback, which states very clearly in that report.
There is lots of challenges in that particular area of Chatham, and I think that would be a very good area for the Community Payback to start working in. That particular lower super output area has enormous challenges, and a lot of the people involved actually come from that area anyway, so there's a lot of synergies there. Yes, when we've got Community Payback up and running fully, it is perfectly possible for any member who's got projects in their own wards that they would wish to bring forward. If you let the Community Safety Unit know, I am quite sure that they would be only too happy to take that on board. Yes, there are issues when it comes to the type of projects they could do, particularly if the people involved are young, because you have to do extensive risk assessments for their safety. I can't comment on the transport issue because I've not got any detailed knowledge about how that would go, but I certainly know that if you've got people on Community Payback who are under 18, every single task that they are asked to undertake has to be individually risk assessed, which is quite right, because young people are often prepared to take greater risks than an adult would, and might not see that they were taking that particular risk. Whilst they're there, to put, as it says, payback, but they're also, we've got a duty of care to make sure that they do not come to any harm themselves while they're engaged in those activities.
Thank you for that answer. Two comments, as I said. One is in regards to the unauthorised encampments and what's been happening. It says here on 17.2, the Community Safety Team has been in consultation with Medway North to explore prevention measures. Well, I believe that every councillor sitting here this evening and every councillor that's been elected has been asking for those prevention measures for the last 12 years. And the amount of times each of us have come individually to you, Cabinet and others, to say, why are we not putting prevention measures in now rather than going through the process of either removing these people and paying the additional cost for clearing up? So we don't understand why that's not occurred. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. As I said, it's a comment that is a general purpose comment. I
think if you've made that, Mr. Chairman, you should give me the right to reply.
Well, it's not a question. I just said very clearly it's a comment. And in addition to that, you made a reference to splashes and its expenditure earlier, which is not how I recall what was stated very clearly at full council and in the papers at full council. So I'm sure everybody here will be reviewing that meeting and the minutes very carefully.
If I was not present on that evening, if I've got it wrong, my understanding when this was discussed at the Splashes Board was that the sum that was put for the extra capital was to cover all eventualities, and the aim was to get the project delivered at below that cost.
No, well, it's unfortunate.
If I've got that wrong, I apologise.
No,
but I believe that is the case.
Okay, but we will review that. Anyway, with that there being any other questions, I'm handing over to the Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Galvin, for attending this evening. I think you deserve a medal. It's been a very long evening. You've answered a great many questions on a very, very wide-ranging subjects. I didn't detect any further recommendations that we need to take forward from that. So that's just, and there's nothing in particular for us to resolve. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much for your very detailed and interesting questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Move on to item 7. Can I just remind members that anything that is greyed out is not for this meeting? Thank you. You've all read the report. Phil is obviously not here, but we have the delectable Katie Durkin to answer your questions.
Oh, what an introduction. Thank you, Chair. This report summarises performance of the council plan measures that fall under the remit of this committee for the second quarter of 22-23, which is the period July to September 22. The full report, or the report that dealt with the whole council, was considered by Cabinet on 15th of November. So there are 9 council plan measures of success which fall in the remit of this committee. They're presented in the appendices with 3 measures in the place priority and 6 in the growth priority. We're reporting on 8 measures for this quarter because 1 is data only, which is the growth value added per job measure. 7 of those 8, though, we're reporting as we've met or exceeded the targets. However, there's one that's significantly below, which just means it's more than 5% away from the target, which is LRCC4A, if we're being specific. This report also presents the Q2 review of the strategic risks, that's Appendix 2, but there were no changes to the strategic risk scores from the last quarter. I will attempt, obviously, to answer any questions, but the wonderful RCE Directorate Management team are here, who I'm sure will be able to do a better job on any of the specifics. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any member? Councillor Curry? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I have one point to raise because this has come up at other committees, so I've made comments at Business and Touchlight. In reference to Appendix 2, page 141 and 142, is about getting around Medway. And in there, it says tackle congestion hotspots by transport and public realm improvements. There's no reference to climate change in that particular measure there. And it would be really, I think it would be really helpful to link that to, particularly to AQMAs and the air quality management plans that we've got, because improvements in public realm are key in terms of public health and safety, in terms of air pollution. So getting around Medway, I think, should have a climate change, and particularly in relation to buses and air pollution generally, would be good to have a reference in there. That's my only point. Thank you, Chair.
Point noted, and will be taken up by officers. Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
If I could just add to Councillor Curry's comments, I think that as well as public transport usage, metrics around cycling and walking are quite important. Later on, I think in the pack, I think on page 144, there's some quite ambitious goals to get climate risk down, and without us tracking those kind of measures, I do think that we just remain a very private car-centred Medway, and actually we need to be seeing whether our efforts to encourage cycling, to encourage walking, are actually bearing fruit if we're to meet those climate change goals. And I think, just the one metric is really not sufficient at the moment. And then just a couple of questions. I was just wondering why we look at strategic risks with such a time lag. So it doesn't seem for me like strategic risk should be something that's also quite forward-looking, and I don't really understand why in December we're looking at something that's from Q2 in terms of the assessment of where we are against that. Maybe there's good operational reasons, but I'd be interested to know why that is. I went to an LGA conference recently where it was looking at risk management, and that certainly that time lag wasn't there for the other council plans that I looked at. And then, just in terms of the overall report, there's lots of detail, which is good. I'm not entirely sure that all of it needs to be there, to be honest. But my main issue is that a lot of it is, again, out of date. So there's references to forthcoming things in September and October. I appreciate it's probably a live document, but that there's also references to things like there's a £20 million levelling up fund bid decision that's due for Innovation Park Medway, that it was due in October. Really interested to know whether we got that or not. And I feel without having that really up-to-date information, the value of the level of detail that we get is not quite there. And actually, we would be able to scrutinise things better and I guess the progress against performance goals and the progress against strategic risks if we had that more up-to-date info. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll attempt to answer that, and I don't know whether colleagues might want to
One on active travel first.
Oh, sorry, we did.
And then we do risk.
Yes. Ruth?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, picking up your points, Councillor, what I can assure you of is at the Member Advisory Group for Climate Change, it was agreed that there was going to be a subgroup that was just going to concentrate on active travel.
Correct.
And you're on it, yes, which is brilliant. So thank you very much. And this is where we'll take this forward and we'll link this all together in a better way. So thank you for your points.
Okay. Now, Katie.
Katie?
Sorry, thank you. So I think the timeline is a kind of function of... So your first question was specifically about risk. And I think what this report tries to do is talk about the objectives of the council are set out in the council plan, so it's right that we measure how we are delivering those objectives. And the risk management piece is about the risks that the organisation might face in delivering those objectives. So I think it's right that we report them together, but essentially what happens is risk is held to the same timescale that we report on performance. So we could obviously separate the two and bring multiple reports to multiple committees and look at them in different timeframes. But I think for the conversation to be had in the round about how well are we managing our performance and are there risks that we're dealing with appropriately, I think it's right for them to be together. But that sort of explains a bit the timescale. I think the reason that they take some time to get through is obviously there's significant amounts of data that have to be sort of input by services following the period end, and then that data needs to be subject to all the relevant sort of data quality checks, and officers need to write narrative, and all of that goes through a sort of internal governance process really. So it will go through things like directorate management teams so that officers understand what that means and what action might be needed to take, and then obviously goes through corporate management team before it goes to cabinet. And obviously I think particularly with this quarter it's quite late because of the gap in the committee cycle where there wasn't a September cabinet, was there? So some of the business got bounced 1 month. So I think this one always falls slightly late. So Q1 and Q3 are a bit more timely, but hopefully that helps somewhat. And I think just the final thing for me is that they're always going to be a snapshot in time. So if we're reflecting on how we're performing against our existing measures, then officers will naturally be talking about the things that they've done that support the performance that we're reporting in that period. So I suppose as a function of that, it's always going to be out of date the second anyone puts pen to paper. But I know that officers work really hard to keep that stuff current. I don't know if anyone's got any specific comments on... No, okay, thanks.
Councillor Hubbard.
Oh, thank you. I know I've mentioned this before, but on page 112, and it's improves street and environmental cleanliness litter, and we get a green. In my ward, if I walk one direction to the suburbia area where the chair lives, it's just not green. It's emerald green, the standard of cleanliness street litter. Walk the same distance the opposite way, and I'm wading through street litter on a daily basis for walking around. And I'm doing a lot of walking around at the moment. I happen to be doing a newsletter delivery, and I'm getting to see that litter over and over again. So it's a bugbear. I know it's just the fact we give ourselves a green, but I wonder, it's just inconsistent. Because we know where's the standard? You go to one area, it'll be red, and in areas it'll be green. I don't understand. We need to be more careful. The other thing is on page 116, we're talking about the replacement of the Medway's streetlights, which has been very good. It's put up my electricity charges, my costs, because I have to turn the light on now when I go upstairs. I don't get free light. And that, of course, is an issue I want to talk about, is the fact that our streets look darker. And I've had constituents, women, of course, on the whole, who are saying our streets are darker, they feel uncomfortable. And what it has emphasised is, because I think the road I'm going to choose is Bryant Road. When I'm not wading up the rubbish in the road, I'm looking at it and it's dark. Because you look up the road and we can see points of light, and you don't see the buildings lit. But the dark pools are always there anyway to start with, because in fact, there's distances between lighting columns is too great. So people felt safe when they shouldn't have felt safe, and now they feel endangered because it looks dark. So it's not because we're going to go around and do a survey where we think that the lights need to be turned up. So I know that the Assistant Director, Ruth, mentioned that she could get them turned up. But in fact, it's not just turning up the lighting level, it's the fact that it's emphasised we've got two gaps in our lighting columns, as they don't stretch where they should do. So I think we're going to pursue that, but it's a fact, you know, they're great, but it's actually highlighted an issue that, frankly, I didn't really appreciate was there.
Any other member? In that case, I'll go directly to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the recommendations in paragraph 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3. Plus, on page 141, it was mentioned that the Getting Around Medway part should have climate change references within it. I think the discussion then widened that into the report as a whole. Officers will look into better ways of incorporating climate objectives within the and air quality, thank you, climate and air quality within the report in future. I so move.
Just to clarify, recommendation 6.3, it says members are asked to determine whether they would like sight of the RCE Directorate risk summary, as set out in section 2.8 of the report. So I just wanted to be clear whether that is something the committee wants or not.
I believe the answer to that is yes.
Right, okay. It's just the recommendation was to determine. Yeah.
And is that agreed? Yes. We now move on to item 8. And it's Katie once again. Any member? No? Vice Chairman.
Right, you caught me out quickly there, Chairman. Therefore, I move the recommendations in paragraphs 14.1 and 14.2. There are no further recommendations.
In that case, then we move on to item 9. Sonny?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, this is part of the Medway 2037 Regeneration set of documents, which we brought to ONS earlier this year, and it's a very similar setup. We are very open here around just putting together a basic structure and really asking for, if you like, consultation feedback from members on the board. We're trying to meet a balance between ambition and deliverability. Won't just be us, there'll be a lot. We'll be depending on working with partners and preparing ourselves for funding opportunities over the coming years. Also, it's covering the river not just as an environment, but also as a place of business. And again, like I said today, we're very much open to your comments and your steer in terms of where you think we are and where you think we should go. And on that basis, I'll hand over to the team to present.
Thank you, Sonny. So I just wanted to say a couple of things up front, and apologies for those members who were at the session 3 or 4 weeks ago, because I'm going to say the same things again as I did then. But the river strategy, as Sonny said, is part of the broader suite of documents, slightly different from the others in the sense that although there have been a couple of draft versions of a river strategy over the last 20 years, there's never been a formal strategy. And so we've really been starting from scratch to pull a new document together. And it's also run very much in parallel with some work that ACOM have been doing in relation to Chatham docks and in relation to some of the river frontage issues around key river infrastructure and some of the other future marketing opportunities, maritime marketing opportunities that could be there looking forward over the next 15, 20 years. So whilst that work has been going on, we've been doing some background consultation with a number of key people, and I'll come to that in a minute. But we were really waiting for the ACOM work to come together so that they will have crunched the numbers, they will have given us some conclusions, and then we were going to pull our consultation work together with the ACOM work, and that's really where we are now, because the ACOM report was delivered a couple of weeks ago, so we're in that position now. So from our point of view, we've been doing a number of consultations, and I think the details of those were sent round. We've probably spoken directly to about 30 people. It's been a mixture of people, so those who were industrial operators, those who are in the leisure and sporting sector, those who have been looking after the key environmental and wildlife issues on the river, and those who have been generally involved in the heritage issues of the river. We are more than happy to, over the next few weeks, a couple of months, to do any further consultations. I know at the meeting we had a few weeks ago, one or two councillors did want us to consult with them, and we're more than happy to do that. And there are one or two others, I'm sure, that will want to get involved with us in that respect. In terms of some of the key issues that we've been pulling together, as Sonny suggested, there are a range of issues which we think are key themes. Some of these overlap with each other, but we've been, particularly through the consultation, drawing out where those issues lie. And just to give you some idea of those themes, there's a range of issues around the natural environment, the wildlife habitats, the protected salt marshes and mudflats and so on and so forth, and how those need to remain to be protected and indeed improved over the years, and indeed guarded against degradation through climate change and so on and so forth. There's been a range of issues around the industrial commercial users, and we've been talking to Thamesport, Scotline, VT, Uniper, National Grid, and a range of smaller users who are actually on the river, and trying to understand what some of those key issues are. And I think particularly around the Kingsnorth opportunity, and particularly in grain, around the National Grid and the possibilities around hydrogen, carbon capture, green ammonia, and so on and so forth. I think there are some really key issues that we want to discuss further and bring to the fore. Then there's issues around leisure and sport, around tourism and the visitor strategy, which I think are absolutely key in how those relate to the river. And indeed, flooding and flood protection, and as I say, climate change and how we deal with those issues vis-a-vis the river. And there are also some key development sites. The earlier strategies talked about areas like Chatham Maritime, Rochester Riverside, and of course, huge progress has been made on those. But there still are some key development sites around Strood, around the stretch between Sunpier and Stile Hill, known as Chatham Intra, as I said, around Kingsnorth and Grain, and in Jenningham as well. So some key sites that need to be brought forward in terms of the development strategy. And then there are two or three other things I think that have really come to the fore. One is around management, safety and security, and a lot of commentary has been fed back to us in terms of keeping the river safe, making it attractive for visitors, and around probably a broader grouping of key interested parties that could be those who are involved in managing the river, but also those who are heavily involved in using it and gain benefit from it. So it could be our heritage assets, it could be organisations like the Bridge Trust and so on and so forth. And I suppose the final thing that's come to the fore is a lot of concern and a lot of issues around how do we position the river as a really fundamental key issue at the heart of Medway. And that seems to have come to the fore from a lot of points of view. So recognising all of those issues, I suppose, we've suggested that we ought to develop some key themes for the strategy. And those are seeing the river in a number of perspectives. So the river as an exceptional natural and wildlife environment, as a major leisure and sporting location, as an important business and economic driver, as a major visitor and tourism attraction, and as a key development opportunity. And then really some overarching themes around how the river plays into climate change and how we deal with that, and this issue of positioning the river at the heart of Medway as a whole, and particularly the residents and the population. So in terms of moving forward, we are proposing to hold a number of workshops, and particularly with key officers within Medway Council over the next couple of months. As I said, we will be doing some further consultations, and I think most importantly, now the ACON work is finished, we will be consulting with the river-based river user companies in Chatham Docks, who we haven't spoken to yet, and Medway Port, and that's another key part of the consultation over the next few weeks, with a view to bringing together a draft of a strategy when we get to spring, and then being able to look at a final draft for consultation in early summer. So that's the current proposals.
Any member? Councillor Tranter, Councillor Curry, Councillor Edwards.
First of all, thank you for sitting through a long meeting to get to this point, which is noted. We did have a discussion some months ago, I think when it was hot. I have to say I was encouraged that you were asking all the right questions, and from what I've seen in terms of the chart and the layout, I couldn't attend the previous presentation. It feels to me, since we're looking at the direction it's going, that it is in the right direction. We could have two different organisations coming up with a strategy quite separately, and both strategies would be correct, but they'd look different. There is no right answer to what you're doing. What I'll be looking for, and I hope other members will be looking for, is that it covers all of the ground that we need when you get to the end of it, and that it will hopefully strategically and if you like, in a planning perspective, help inform all other aspects of the council. So, for example, whether it's Mr. Harris with planning, or whether it's somebody looking at tourism or looking at the environment, hopefully the piece of work that comes out of the end of it will be something practical, which will enable all other officers, when their activities benefit from or contribute to the river, that they will look at this and they say, right, this is what we must do, this is how it all fits together. And so there's lots of ways of achieving that outcome. I hope that's where you're going to end up. I will also be looking personally, especially for the AECOM activity, hopefully at some point looking at the data which supports and underpins any conclusions and so on that it comes from. So really, it's not really a question in the middle of that, but it's more of a comment, and other than possibly for you to affirm that that is the direction in which you are going, and hopefully we'll all enjoy the output as and when it is completed.
Chair, yes, I can confirm that. I think that's exactly where we're going. It's not. There's a complex range of issues here, and as you say, it could be drafted from a number of perspectives. But I think we're definitely hoping that we will get to that point where it does have something to say across a number of agendas. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Oh,
when this, thank you, Chairman. When this journey started, I asked the very basic question, what is making the River Medway tick? And I wanted to SQW and work with all those partners to find out what is the lifeblood of the river, who is dependent on the river. So if the river wasn't there, would their business fold? Would they have to go and find another river? And I think through this work, we are identifying all those various partners and stakeholders, and I can give the assurance that it will touch all areas of council service delivery relevant to the River Medway and explore all those opportunities that we wish to take it.
Councillor Curry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your report so far, because I think this is really encouraging. In fact, something perhaps 20 years ago under the old Rochester upon Medway Council, we should have had this done in detail, but nevertheless, we're here where we are. And I think this is really encouraging work. I mean, there's a lot in here that is good to see. I mean, in particular around access, for the public, creating that access. At the moment, large chunks of the river are inaccessible, which is a real shame. And I think that building on the work done, there's a number of things that I'm sure you've already thought of, actually, but I'll drop my 2 pennies worth in, if you like. One of them is that the fact that the Medway cannot be looked in isolation within Medway alone. Its catchment is Kent. So we need to be talking with Kent and with Maidstone in particular. A lot of the plastic that ends up on the estuary comes from Maidstone and just floats down. So there's issues around that. Southern Water, I don't think I've seen them mentioned, but they're key in this, and I'm sure you've got them in your head. I mean, in terms of discharges, it's shocking, and Councillor Osborne has been making a big issue about this over the last year, really, in particular the behaviour of that. So that's another issue that's in there that needs to be thought of. And what I'd like to see is I mean, it's a delicate balance between how much detail you go into before you publish, because you could go down to the minutiae, but this is a strategic document, but it does need to have some sort of real nuts and bolts in the centre of it as well. So I'll be looking forward to seeing what they are and how that works out. And my final point really is, and I think I made this point when we had the presentation that you did for us a couple of weeks ago, is this should have included the docs, and it was 2 separate reports. The ACOM report came out separately from this. I would have loved to have seen the 2 merged together. Would it be possible to have a copy of the ACOM report? I think I've asked for it and not had one yet, so I would really like to see a copy, if I may, at some point. But it's certainly hugely important. The role of the docs in relation to the Medway is key, and having the 2 merged together, I'm looking forward to seeing how that works out as well. But all good so far. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the slides and the presentation tonight. I really welcome the general direction of the slides. I think it seems to be hitting all the right notes, and I've always thought that we needed to make much more of the River Medway, so really welcome it. Particularly welcome as well the idea of a river trust, and very interested in that kind of work. It is quite a high-level document, though, and I'm wondering if you could let us know when they'll be kind of fleshed out a little bit more. You know, I'm obviously particularly interested in the kind of practical and financial measures that would support the strategy. I got the impression from the document that we might have had quite a few strategies in the past, and I want to make sure that this actually, you know, delivers something practical and has the support there. So yeah, I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to be provided a little bit more detail ahead of it going to Cabinet in February, but would be interested in any thoughts you had on that. Thank you.
Chairman, if I can, so we'll sweep up at the end just with the next steps, and I think that will answer and respond to some of Councillor Edwards' questions that she had there. But if that's okay with you, Chairman, I think we'll take Councillor Hubbard's first. If that's okay, then my guys can sweep up. Yeah? Thank you.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to say that I think that all those ward members who have the river adjacent on their boundary would be useful to be part of a conversation. I've been talking about river and access to the river since I got elected in '91, so I've seen various forms of strategies over the period of time. Rochester upon Medway City Council had quite a few. And some of those things actually did come about, you know, the great riverside walks, which we all call Shore Walk after the leader of the council, John Shaw. A lot of those are in place around the Rochester, around Strood and such like. So things have come on tremendously since I've been living in the area, but we need to go back and visit and sometimes reinvent it or reinstate it. It wasn't that long ago where you could get off a train at Strood and get the ferry at Kingswear all the way up to London Bridge and back again. People doing the circuit, and the Strood Pier is not functioning anymore, nor is Rochester Pier, etc. So we need to certainly rediscover things we used to do and discover new things to do.
Thank you. Any other member? And before I hand over to Richard, a couple of points from myself. First of all, in terms of the consultation, you don't seem to have included the freemen of the river. I don't know if there's any particular reason why. I'll certainly follow up on what's already been stated regarding Southern Water in terms of their sewage discharges, because we've seen loads of that taking place. But more importantly, have you had any consultation with the houseboat yards? Because I'm aware that still a number of those houseboats are not connected to main sewage and they discharge their sewage into the water directly. And then finally, within regards to Peel, making sure Peel take up their responsibilities for clearing up the shore of dead boats and other junk that's just been dumped over there over a period of years. And they seem to have managed to get away with that quite succinctly. But besides that, thank you very much for the report. I'll now hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members, for your comments and for your support for the general direction of travel. This is another instance where we were bringing forward proposals that are fulfilling overview and scrutiny's policy development role. So that was really helpful to have those comments and contributions from you all, members, so thank you for that. Chairman, just in response to some of those specific points that you raised, certainly the freemen of the river, we talked about their heritage and the history of the river, so Rochester oyster floating fishery, certainly ensuring that plays into some of our proposals around it. I think it'd be really important to capture that. A number of members have pointed to the issues around SWS, Southern Water. We'll certainly be engaging with them around their roles and responsibilities, as we will too with Peel Ports. One of the challenges around the river is in terms of who has responsibility, who has authority, who has powers to act. So it's important that Peel Ports play their role within that. So I think, Chairman, I would just like my guys to reiterate just those timelines that we're working to in terms of those next steps, because there will be some further engagement. You've identified some further consultees that we'll go through. So just a general kind of idea and flavour of those next steps for members. And then I think that would conclude the item for us, Chairman. Thank you.
So very broadly speaking, we've obviously identified more stakeholders, and again, we've got more work to do, like if you like, from here. As stated before, we're doing it from scratch. We're not in a rush, if that's okay. We want to make sure that we get this right. It's quite a complex area. There's quite a lot of different views to balance, and obviously there's quite a lot. Pragmatism and delivery has come through a lot. So again, we've got to make sure a large proportion of it is something we can actually do. And again, there's a number of other partners and responsible stakeholders to involve as well. So we're looking really, I think your request in regard to coming back to ONS, we can do it similar to the way we did Medway 2037, where we started with the concept and then we came back with the direction, if you like, and fleshed out the body and the framework of it, and coming out with some of the more practical interventions as well, so we can come back to the ONS and have a more detailed consultation on that. We're looking at probably late spring, early summer is when we'll actually have the final document. So I will suggest that we take this outside of this room and decide when would be the most appropriate ONS to come back to, if that's agreeable.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned in paragraph 10.1, we recommend that we just note the progress on the report. I've picked up some points that we would like to see the AECOM report to be circulated as and when it is available to do so, when it's ready for that, please, to all members. There's been several organisations mentioned as stakeholders, as we might call them, such as Southern Water, Freemen of the River, Peel Ports and others, who need to be involved. Rather than try and list all of those, I think it's fair to suggest that members should feed in, presumably, to the team suggestions, and they will, of course, happily pick that up as we go forward. So maybe all members could do that. And we look forward to seeing the report, hopefully next summer, coming back to this committee to be decided. I so move. Thank you, Chair.
Is that seconded? Councillor Williams. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 10, 106, development contributions. And it's Mr. Harris who's sitting here looking rather chilled.
Chilled but not delectable, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Just bringing this forward, following discussions with yourself, Chairman, to try and dispel some of the rumours or the feelings as to what Section 106s can actually achieve. They're not the silver bullet for everything. There are certain rules that we've got to apply. But also you wanted members to understand what Section 106s have been signed, what those contributions or whatever go towards, and then in terms of infrastructure going forward. So there are two things, Chairman, that you asked me to provide. Was this briefing note, and then including with that a quarterly circulation of the information that goes to Planning Committee, so that all the members here are able to understand that. And then on an annual basis, because we've got to do the infrastructure funding statement, which goes to Cabinet every December, the overview and scrutiny immediately after that, if members wanted to have that, IFS reported to it.
Thank you, Dave. Any member? Councillor Hubbard, Councillor Curry.
My main concern is developers trying to get out of paying Section 106s. Now, the one that is highlighted here in Appendix 2 on page 187 is the Trafalgar Centre multi-storey car park. We had contributions there paid, but immediately on us giving permission, the site was simply sold and went to somebody else. So my concern is the fact that it's coming part of the play of developers to try to get out of Section 106s, including our own company. And I'm just concerned that we need that Section 106 money to do various works. And I was thinking at the Who development framework, you know, in the Who there, you talk about all these things going to happen, and it's subject to Section 106s, and under the current climate, we may not be getting what we think we should be getting, or people trying to get out of it as well. So we've got to be very tough and very strong. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just sort of picking up on Councillor Hubbard's point, I mean, if the PL ports and the MDC sort of ideas for withdrawing Section 106 money, Chatham Town Centre developments would have lost over £1 million in terms of infrastructure funding. So that's how serious that issue is. I'm just emphasising a point there that's come up. In terms of this report, thank you very much. It's really helpful, and I think the quarterly note would be really welcome. Just one issue in there is, I think it relates to what we've just said about the fact that 106 is not the catch-all and the sort of magic thing that will provide the infrastructure we need. It's a tiny fraction, actually, in relation to a lot of developments, particularly in relation to Who, for example. It won't deliver all the things that we need for Who. So there is an issue around understanding what 106 is about. But the one thing that sort of specific point I'd like to make, and it has happened on a number of occasions, is that ward members get to hear about what 106 money is available for their wards, so that they can have a say, because a lot of us do have loads of ideas of things we'd like to put into place. It's just being aware of how much money is available and whether it can be used for the things that we've got. So I think generally ward members would appreciate an understanding of what's available and when it's available and that sort of thing. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
So can I just add to that is sometimes the money that's available to the ward is outside the ward. So, you know, I know the stuff that's been done in Temple Marsh, I've actually got access to, because it's been used in my ward, but it's actually in the ward adjacent. So it's just not specific to a ward, it's actually areas, because wards actually don't reflect where contributions could go.
Dave.
Chairman, thank you very much. And I think Councillor Curry's put it very well in terms of that point that Section 106 won't cover everything. And very much where, for development, the government, even this week, has reaffirmed brownfield first. And with brownfield sites and town centre sites, there are some viability issues there, and we won't get the level of contributions from Section 106 that we would get on greenfield sites. So there's a lot of work that we've got to do to bring in funding from elsewhere to deliver the infrastructure that Councillor Curry quite rightly points out, but still delivering the homes and the regeneration that we need. I accept totally Councillor Curry's and Councillor Hubbard's points regarding our ward councillors, and quite often the planning committee will say to me, can I make sure that when we're agreeing where certain parts of contribution should go, that there are discussions with ward councillors, and we can continue that.
Any other member? Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I think in this instance, the recommendations in paragraphs 8.1, 8.2 and 8.3 cover everything that we need to. That is, we look forward to receiving a quarterly briefing note, and we will in due course see the Medway infrastructure funding statement come through. I so move, Chair.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Clark? Agreed?
Agreed.
And then we move directly on to item 11, petitions. I'll hand over to Richard.
Chairman, thank you. I wasn't going to say very much on this. The report is as it is. Thank you.
Excellent. So we move on to the work programme.
Do we just want to say that last report was agreed then, Chairman, as well?
Yeah, I think, Chair, if I may, the committee has requested to note the petition responses and appropriate office action set out in paragraphs 3.4 of, as set out in paragraphs 3 and 4 of the report.
And seconded by Councillor Clark. Agreed. Everybody? Yes. Excellent.
Yeah, so nothing specifically to add on the work programme, but just to advise that I am aware one of the probation service representatives was actually sick tonight. So, but I will go back to them and see if they have anything to add in terms of why they weren't able to send another representative.
Okay, there are two things to add to the work programme. Members may recall that we're looking for a briefing note in January and another one in 6 months' time regarding Community Safety Partnership. So besides that, Vice Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, I think it's all covered in paragraph 7.1, which I so move, adding, of course, in the two briefing notes that you've already referred to. Thank you.
Councillor Clark seconded. Agreed? Oh, thank you. Right, thank you all for your attendance this evening, and most especially to Councillor Tranter, who stepped in as Vice Chair at the very last minute as he walked in through the door. Yeah. Thank you.